done is we have this last week pulled a number of projects out of the capital improvement program. And probably at this point, as I get into that, Scott, is it okay if I describe that structure before Mr. Najarian?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, the city manager can certainly describe what the process is. The council cannot have any discussion whatsoever about it until Councilmember Najarian, as I would advise him to state the nature of the potential conflict of interest and excuse himself from the dais.
Okay, so with that, let me describe generally what we've done. This, go back to the first slide. So again, what we've tried to do in the last week is to create a process where the basic general fund capital improvement program, where we preserve the council's ability to discuss the general fund capital improvement program after July 1. And we don't have a schedule for that, but I think one of the first things you will need to be after July 1 is to sit down and do a schedule to establish some study sessions in a time frame that we can gather information about the various major CIP projects and bring them back to you. I think, for example, of the Rockhaven property and how much more additional information we will need to really sort through whether or not that is a project and what form it would be used and what it would be cost and where it should lie in our 10-year capital improvement program if we're going to proceed, if that's the council's direction. Pulling out those projects out of the CIP means then that we have a significant reduction in the amount of anticipated projects. We left the resource projections as they are. So the projects that we would pull out, as noted on the second slide, and go ahead and go to that one, Ron, are listed here. Now, a number of these were already on your unfunded list. Some of these were on your funded list at various times over the 10-year schedule. We've pulled those out for the purpose of, frankly, having every council member feel confident that we're not trudging forward in a direction that you may not be supportive of individually, and that there's going to be an opportunity to discuss the projects that weren't on the funded list but were on the unfunded list, and some of which were raised last week that weren't on any list, that those will be explored before any commitments are made. In this way, we end up having a rather long projects not funded list for which we'll need to gather additional information and come back to City Council for direction. And it will leave in your CIP, as Ron will point out, a rather significant amount of resources in each of the years that isn't allocated. Now, that means in order for those funds to be used, you'd have to give direction as a City Council.
But we can't discuss it.
I'm not discussing it. I'm just saying that on that list, we did not put in
street improvements?
the street improvement on Central and stuff that was in the EIR.
Okay. We'll add that.
You can discuss that. So so you framed the issue that council will deal with, and I need to state that.
Let me just add, in order for Mr. Najarian to participate in the balance of the CIP, there would need to be some finality to this approach. That is, the council indicating. Scott, why don't you describe what you'd like to have the council indicate?
I think it's appropriate now for the mayor to announce his recusal.
Okay. And as I've stated before, my situation has not changed. I have an interest in real estate adjacent to Fire Station 26 and the Casa Verduga Library, and due to a financial conflict, I will be recusing myself from the discussions of the issue framed by Mr. Starbird and further discussed by my colleagues. And Mr. Weaver is the pro tem this month.
Okay, what do my colleagues think of this approach? I support it. Get these topics off. Each one is worthy of long deliberation, discussion, and staff analysis for us to review. We're not going to do it in a week or two. In fact, in 11 years, I've never seen this amount of audience participation on unfunded projects that normally come through the process one by one during the fiscal year.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I might point out the CIP draft number 9 that Ron has distributed this morning to you reflects the impact of pulling those projects out. And if you actually turn to the detail, you'll see that, for example, on the project of the Casa Fire Station and Library, there is no allocation of money for that in the entire 10 years. The same with Fire Station 29. There is no allocation for the entire 10 years. The result of that is that at the bottom where you see the total available resources kind of in the middle remains the same. But at the bottom where it says annual surplus, where you would have, where before you saw some rather small numbers across the bottom until you got into the out years, except for year one, and none of the big projects were scheduled in year one, except in year one, the annual surplus goes up demonstrably. Rather large numbers.
And where does that money go to?
It'll sit there. It'll sit there in fund balance until you have authorized its
Fund balance?
appropriation. Fund balance means in the CIP fund. It'll stay in the CIP fund. It sits there as part of the retained earnings in the CIP fund until you've allocated it. Now, that presumes that all the resources come together as anticipated. We've left on the resources side the potential for the GRA bond funding, and that's what really drives the numbers up. We haven't pulled that out. We've left it there. But we have pulled out any of those major projects that have some question mark to them, and they're all listed in your projects not funded. And you would have to come back at a later time to commit any of these additional resources to any of these projects or other projects that might come up.
Which is normal anyhow. Anything would come up, we would have to vote to authorize it.
Right. In the normal course, if you had a project plugged into the CIP in some year, you would still have to approve the project relative to its design, plans and specifications, eventual approval. But in this way, you don't even get that far. It's not even identified in the CIP. And this would be the way the budget would be presented to you for adoption at the public hearing.
We know the funds are there, and eventually down the road,
Exactly.
we will then end up prioritizing of these unfunded, which ones we want to move ahead with first.
Exactly.
So I don't see any harm in it. Our reserves have just increased temporarily.
Right.
What projects did you put in the non-funded category?
There, let's go up to the initial site. So the two fire stations, the associated libraries, which the Northwest Glendale Branch Library was identified as a potential replacement for the Casa Verdugo Library if we used Fire Station 26 site for the fire station. The question of soccer fields, which really incorporates Site A and C, which we list later, but soccer fields, Site A and C, the Rockhaven property, a community aquatic center, which is anticipated to be something bigger than the neighborhood center or the Pacific Park pool, but we've actually pulled off the balance of Pacific Park pool as well, because there's some question about the cost of that and what that's going to be. So all of these items, had they been in the CIP, and there's a few of them that were pulled out, Freeway Park sites A and C. Now, Brand Library, there was some question about whether or not we'd provide additional funding. Nancy's prepared to have that discussion with you today. And indeed, if you're comfortable with this approach and you approve it this morning, then I think Mr. Najarian can participate in that discussion. Scott?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, perhaps a brief explanation of the process that's needed to be able to bring Mayor Najarian back into the CIP budget discussions. Under Fair Political Practices Commission regulations, you are permitted to segment discrete parts of the whole. In other words, in this case, discrete parts of the capital improvement program to be handled first. Those which create the potential financial conflict of interest need to be handled first and come to some finality. Once that occurs and they're not so inextricably intertwined with the others, in other words, we can't bring and what I will say, the two projects, Casa Verdugo Library and Fire Station 26, which create the conflict, back into the mix for potential discussion either directly or indirectly, and you have some finality regarding those two projects, the Mayor would be able to come back and discuss other discrete segments of the CIP budget and ultimately vote on the entire budget under FPPC regulations. So you would have to take some kind of action today, at least as it pertains to Fire Station 26 and Casa Verdugo, by indicating, a majority of you indicating that we're done with that discussion now until sometime after the adoption of the budget, which would occur prior to July 1. But you would have to come to some finality now to allow the Mayor to come back in and discuss the other components of the CIP.
So we do that in the form of a motion?
You can, because we've noticed this as a study session, we just need to make sure that on the record we have three individuals or more, we have three now, noting that Fire Station 26 and Casa Verdugo, as presented by the Interim Director of Finance, or Interim Director of Administrative Services Finance, that those two projects, the way it's presented, with no money in the CIP program for the next 10 years, it's final. That's not going to be discussed any longer. If it's ever discussed, it's going to be after the adoption of the budget at some time in the future.
My question is, do we want to discuss any of these today or next week? We're trying to adopt a budget by the end of June, which we have to by law. And how much detail do you want to get into right now? You want to pull them all, and then we decide what priority they come back to us in individually, so that when it gets to a fire station or library, he's out and we can discuss all the others.
I think the city manager can explain his reasoning for putting this together as it was. My concern as the legal advisor to the council and the mayor is that the conflict is created by Fire Station 26 in the library, so in order to fall within FPPC regulations, you want to deal with those two and get finality on those two. However, because I'll let Mr. Starbird explain the reasons why you've got all these others in there as well.
Look, every one of these items, Mr. Starbird, is controversial and going to take time. Location of soccer fields, that's complex. We're talking with the school district, we're talking about Site B that's never been used. That's not going to go down easy. Access, et cetera. Rockhaven is going to take a lot of time to discuss. It's library and whatever, and potential uses. None of these are going to be easy to handle, so why not pull them all?
There is only, I think, one on the list that you all indicated a desire to bring some finality to. That was the Brand Library discussion from last week.
With the exception of that.
So with the exception of that, very few of these do you have enough information that you could even make a decision. I think of the general topic of open space. There's an article in today's news press about the Mountain Oaks property. Rockhaven is kind of in the same condition. You don't even have enough information to know how big that nut happens to be, let alone what you would put in the CIP.
And the emails are flowing in on Rockhaven, flowing in on Mountain Oaks, flowing in on all of these things, and we're sitting here with virtually no information to make any kind of informed decision on.
You make up Brand Library was my only point in terms of items on this
I can
list.
understand that, Mr. Contreras.
Well, in addition to Brand Library, Pacific Park already has funding attached to it. We're in the process of...
Let me double check. I don't think we pulled out the existing funding for the Pacific Park pool, so that is all still there.
Okay.
It's just how much more you need to allocate has not been addressed in the CIP.
But we're going to continue to do Parks and Rec. We'll continue to do whatever they need to do to...
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And in fact, what
forward.
you'll find, if the council approves this approach, what you'll find is we're going to spend the next month doing a whole lot of research trying to pin down numbers. The concept of a dog park, for example, you saw some conceptual locations. No numbers have been put to any of those. You haven't heard from the public on any of those. Those sorts of things would need to be sorted out as we begin after the first of the year to walk down the road to evaluate each of these and decide what your priorities are. In the meantime, the resources are in the fund. They're not allocated. They're not earmarked. They're going to sit there as projected fund balance in the capital improvement program.
Well, I think this is a good approach to get the work done that we need to get done. And while I don't mind Mr. Najarian being muzzled, to bring him back on the...
He has no comment.
Bring him back on the dais is fine. So I'm for it. I'm for the plan.
Leaving Brand still in the discussion, pull the others.
Plan as presented.
Mr. Yusefian?
By the way, I didn't say anything about muzzling, so I just want you to know. So, I think it's fine with me. The only thing that I like to deal with is Brand. I think that's pretty simple, just money. The other item that I would like to make sure it's added on is all the street improvements that was discussed in the downtown specific plan that needs to be done by 2010.
Well, let's see, streets, you'd be looking at that anyhow, right?
Well, it's
These
good,
are just going to go into the
to
same
put it on the
category.
list, though. I mean, it is good to put it on the
Oh,
list.
yeah.
Because Steve talked about just Central being $12 million. I mean, that's not a small ticket item.
You agree?
In addition to these things we've identified, you still have all the items that were already on the unfunded list. For example, Mr. Zern's desire for additional supplemental funding for just general street maintenance and improvement.
Okay, you got three that agree with that
Yeah.
approach.
So with that,
With streets and-
I think you have
So with that,
consensus.
just so the record is clarified, the issue of Fire Station 26 and the Casa Verdugo Branch Library and the funding in the budget as presented is now final. There'll be no further discussion involving that until
Later
after
date.
the adoption of the budget.
Right.
And that is now final, and figures that have been provided to you by Mr. Allers, which is essentially no money in the capital improvement program, at least for those two, as well as the others, but primarily for those two, is essentially final.
Finalized, including leaving Brand in for discussion and putting the streets, additional street improvements into the unfunded category for study.
One question. There are speakers, as Mayor Najarian comes up, if any of the speakers would like to speak on any of those two items, are they allowed?
Yes.
Or are they not?
Nothing in the Fair Political Practice Commission regulations or the government code precludes the speakers from speaking about items.
We just can't
they may
comment.
We can't
create,
discuss
but
it.
they may create the potential conflict for discussion amongst the council members if it's dragged back in. What we should do is maybe hear from these speakers in case they know the direction the council seems to be taking with regard to at least those two items. If there are speakers that want to discuss fire stations and the libraries.
There is a second
Take them
item on the
now.
list that you may want to have some minor discussion of by way of feedback from the staff, and that's soccer fields, only because we had the meeting with the school superintendent and have a little bit of at least feedback for you relative to the possibility of both the tennis courts project at the high school as well as the Columbus School site as a potential for a soccer field site. You may want to get that feedback.
All we did was give direction, so we have the latitude to have that discussion.
Again, the point that I'm trying to make is that under FPC regulations, though the two items that create the potential conflict, we need to come to some finality. And the finality that we have before you is
We gave it.
no money in the budget, and that's final. Those aren't coming back up for discussion
Casa,
again.
Verdugo, Branch Library,
those
and
two.
Fire
But Ms.
Station.
Starbird now has said maybe we would like to.
No, but I think a discussion of soccer fields doesn't bring those items
doesn't.
back into the
So we
question.
can bring back, even though we said take it all out, we can still have the discussion because it doesn't pertain.
My suggestion is you come to a decision on what you want to discuss now. We have finalization on Fire Station 26.
Okay, Ms. Starbird, anything
The more things you start either
Pulling
drift
back
in
in.
or dribble back in.
I think soccer, and again, soccer fields is just an update. We're not going to make a decision here, but just giving an update, and Brand Library.
Is that okay with my colleagues?
That's fine.
Good. I have four speakers. Do any of you plan to speak on fire stations or libraries? Okay, then two of you can speak first before we bring the mayor back up. Bryce? Bruce? Philippot?
I guess I can still say it, Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Starbird and staff. My name is Bruce Philpott, Glendale resident. I'm here to speak on the issue of fire stations 26 and 29 and the accompanying libraries. As you know by now, I oppose the expenditure of at least $20 million to demolish and rebuild them. The actual interior space of the buildings would go from 6,800 square feet to 18,000 square feet each. There is no mention in conversations I've had with several top-level managers of the Glendale Fire Department that additional space is required because otherwise the public safety would be at risk. There is no mention of this space expansion in the consultant's report either, being more valuable. In fact, the consultant says that the existing buildings are made of the strongest building materials available and do not distract from allowing the firefighters to perform efficiently and effectively now. He also says that no public safety benefit to citizens would result if the buildings were to be replaced. Why then is this item before the council? I have heard two main reasons. First is that the need for larger apparatus rooms so that they can move more easily between the vehicles. My response is that the Glendale Fire Department has one of the best response times in the industry, and a larger apparatus bay will not improve upon readiness or response capability. This is what the consultant said in his report. The equipment may not be required for a run. The equipment that may be required for a run is laid out in the apparatus or in the appropriate places that have proven to be the most efficient over time. Widening the apparatus room will not improve upon this. It may give firefighters more elbow room, but no greater quickness to emergency calls. Firefighters always replenish their equipment when returning on runs, if needed. They also prepare their turnouts and other equipment when they return to the station. According to the Glendale Fire Department's own data, the 9 engine companies average 15 minutes per run, per emergency run. That's from the time they were dispatched to the time that they clear their call. Average, every run, medical and fire, averages 15 minutes. And each of them average 6 runs per 24-hour shift. The Glendale Fire Department's records state that this equates to each engine company, on average, being committed on calls 3.55% of their on-duty time. This leaves them with 96.45% of their shift to allow them to prepare for the next run. The consultant said it would be a good idea to have equipment storage space closer to or in the apparatus bay area. But clearly there is ample time for firefighters to move the necessary equipment from the existing storage areas to where they are needed for the next run. The second reason is that the Glendale Fire Department is having a problem storing 2 large vehicles, the Urban Search and Rescue vehicle and the hazmat vehicle. Only one is reportedly not found a suitable home, the hazmat vehicle. It should be stored downtown in the general area where the most likely need is, Station 21, where the USAR vehicle is. Since the consultant admittedly has no background or knowledge of fire operations or fire stations, the only source of his recommendation to tear down and rebuild Stations 26 and 29 was based upon information supplied to him by members of the Glendale Fire Department. Unfortunately, he did not present any source material for the project to go forward. He merely made the recommendation. He left out the important stuff like justification. But he did include a statement that he looked into the future growth of the areas serviced by both Station 26 and 29 and concluded that there would be no need to add additional personnel or apparatus in the foreseeable future, which would maybe justify a larger building. An unintended consequence of this project is the dislocation of 2 neighborhood libraries. With no cost estimates or their final resting places known, if any, this can only become a huge nightmare. Another looming nightmare of a gargantuan type would be the 1 to 2 year temporary quarters for the fire stations while they are being demolished and rebuilt. How many more millions have to be added for this to happen, assuming it's possible in the first place? The city of Glendale should be proud to have fire stations 26 and 29 in its arsenal against structure fires and response to medical emergencies. The firefighters working in these 2 stations has performed and will continue to perform, if left alone, their admirable work in the same professional manner that they always have.
Thank you. Thank you. Your time's up. 5 minutes. 5 minutes per.
I have a question.
Mr. Yusefian?
In your statements, you said that the consultant we hired was not qualified. In all due respect, what's your qualifications?
What am I?
Yeah.
Just a concerned activist citizen, but in my former years, I'm a retired police chief in the city of Pasadena. Back in the mid-'80s, when we consolidated police and fire under public safety, the police chief became the director of public safety, and as the commander of the police department, I was assigned under public safety a support position that included the responsibility of the 8 physical structures of the fire stations in Pasadena, the 8 stations and all the engines and trucks and paramedics that are assigned to those 8 stations for approximately 2 years. I was in that assignment.
So your experience with fire is for 2 years being quasi fire chief and police chief?
Well, not the fire chief became the deputy public safety director, and I worked under both the police and fire chief with the rank of commander. But I was in charge of that division. They had the responsibility for the physical structures of the 8 fire stations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who else wishes to speak on fire stations only? Or libraries? Hands up now. Chris Stavros? Okay, after this speaker, there'll be no more discussion.
No.
Ms. Milano, you want to speak on
Milano.
that item too? Okay. Anybody else? Okay, after Mr. Milano, Mrs. Okay, then we'll do all the speakers now. We're all priority. Then we'll go on. Stavros?
I'll be
For the
brief,
record.
thanks. I want to, Chris Stavros, President of the Glendale Firefighters Association. I wanted to thank the council members for their support of the fire department over the years. The citizens and your employees are better off because of it. We greatly appreciate it. I also want to thank Mr. Philpott. His glowing comments about the fire department are so unusual coming out of his mouth, and I wonder if he's mellowed in his old age. But I'll remember that in the future when he says things that aren't so nice about us. Some of what he said about the fire stations is true. You do not need to replace the fire stations right now. Eventually, you're going to have to do it. Okay? You didn't have to replace the police department building right away, right? They outgrow it. Technology got better. They needed the room, right? There's rats, cockroaches, whatever it may be. It would have worked, right? But you replaced it. The real question for you is, what's the best thing for the community? That's what I would do. What's the best thing for the community? If you think the best thing for the community is now or in the near future to spend that money on rebuilding fire stations that are going to last 60 or 70 years, then do it. I don't think the price is going to go down, and I do think that they're going to need to be replaced. Last week, I heard you talk about spending $850,000 on some tennis courts. Now, I believe parks, libraries, and everything like that are very important. I like tennis. But to me, if you're going to spend $850,000 on some tennis courts, spending 10 or 12 times that on a fire station that is going to last 60 or 70 years is not unreasonable. It is a lot of money. One of the few things that Barry Allen, Herbert Milano, or Bruce Philpott have ever came up here and told you that is truthful or is factual is that you should strongly consider spending $25 million on fire stations. That's one of the few things of any merit that's ever come out of their mouth relating to the fire department. And you should consider it. And as I said, they're going to need to be replaced sometime. I work at Fire Station 26. I've been there almost my whole career. We have rats, we have cockroaches. It is too small. We have increased service level. We have more people working. Can we live with it? Yeah, we can. But as I said before, it's going to have to be replaced sometime. Forward-looking city council looks at that and says, pay me now or pay me later. Okay? Mr. Giuseppe was in the construction business. I don't think the cost of concrete, steel, and labor is going down.
No?
I want to touch on one other thing, if I can, just relating to the fire department. I do want to let you know that either me or my Vice President, John Fitzgerald, are going to become semi-regular visitors to City Council, whether we're on duty or off duty. One of the other things that they have consistently came up here and talked to you about, which relates to the budget, is the use of reserves or volunteers or 3 versus 4-man engine companies. One thing that we do is we do our homework. Okay? You have consistently compared the city of Glendale to cities like Torrance, Pasadena, Santa Monica, because they're cities of similar size, similar income budget. You've done it for all the CIP planning process, long-range planning. How much money do they have in reserves? Okay? Out of the 108 fire engines or trucks in those 9 cities, all but 13 are staffed at 4-man, and one city still has 5-man trucks. That is the industry standard. And I can tell you the cities that have 3-man engines do not have half the hazards we have. They have virtually no brush in the city. This is a city where topography and weather has a big factor on your delivery of fire and emergency services. It has a big factor on it. Having a 4-man crew keeps our people safe. It allows us to respond to your family, to your relatives, quicker, better, and more efficiently. And you have consistently provided us with that. We greatly appreciate it. You've consistently provided us with excellent personal protective equipment and excellent fire engines and fire trucks. And that allows us to do a really, really high-quality job. The one other thing I want to say about your employees, and this is something I know from experience because I worked somewhere else before I came here, you get a higher quality and a greater quantity of work out of the firefighters in this city than almost any other city in the United States. And you should be proud of that. On the use of reserves or volunteers, you should never even consider that. Virtually nobody uses reserves or volunteers to supplement for paid professional firefighters. Virtually nobody. Yet they come up here and talk about it all the time. I want to thank you very much for your time. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you. Next speaker, Herbert Milano.
Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem Weaver, members of the City Council, City staff. My name is Herbert Milano. One of the issues concerning the budget process is that it is a difficult process. It's a process about making choices and making trade-offs. And I don't for a minute would consider that this process is an easy one in light of so many interests that have different types of priorities. And that is one of the reasons why I so strongly advocate the use of proper monitoring and performance measures so that the whole community can take a look at the actual disbalance, or if there is one, within our needs throughout, whether it be for parks and recreation, whether it be for infrastructure, roads, and so forth. Because it is only when we take a look at the whole encompassing needs of the city that we can begin to make the appropriate choices. I'd like to quote a couple of things. This is one from the Urban Institute, which I strongly suggest for any member of the city management and the public to look at. Here's a short quote. The pressures to do more with less and still demonstrate results have grown. Governments are increasingly recognizing the need to build and sustain results-based M&E systems to demonstrate performance. M&E mean monitoring and evaluation. Now, I have looked for the past few weeks at different websites of different cities, their objectives and their measures. Here's one from Indianapolis, Indiana, whose mayor made some significant strides in reducing the cost of government. He says, government, on the other hand, becomes less responsive and more expensive over time. Spending by the federal government has exploded over the past 4 decades, yet no one would argue that government services are better today than they were 40 years ago. To most government managers, the private sector practice of cutting budgets while increasing services seems a bizarre and paradoxical dream. And because I'm in the private sector, I come and take a look and evaluate, see, how do we evaluate the need for a particular capital improvement? I decided to take a look at the fire department of the city of Vancouver, Washington, and find out what do they give us that our fire department does not give us. And I'll just give you a couple. For example, false alarms. Are we making a significant stride in reducing the number of false alarms? And I think we have a significant number. But they have a goal. Their goal is to reduce it to be under 10% for this coming fiscal year, 2007. For example, when it comes to emergency services, the cardiac arrest survival rate in Vancouver, Washington is barely 4%. So if you get a heart attack in the city of Washington, the chances are that you will die. Now, that's a performance measure. It's a valid one. I don't know if it could be improved or it could, but nonetheless, it's a measure of performance. And here's another one. Overtime as a percent of basic salary. 5%. Let me repeat that. Overtime as a percent of basic salary. It took me about a year to find out what is the total amount, the number of employees who earn over $100,000 gross in the city of Glendale. There are 486 employees who earn over $100,000. Now, I don't expect anyone to walk into Public Works and start looking around for all those employees who are earning over $100,000, or in housing and community development, community housing, neighborhood services. The point is that out of nearly 2,300 total employees that we have, 2,300, 486, over 20%, earn over $100,000. And then I take a look at the need for roadways, the need for our infrastructure repair, the need for parks, and look at the increase in population. And if we had those measures, we would see the disparity is very significant. So I asked the question, are we doing enough comparisons in order to be able to gauge properly where our budget should go? Do we need a $21 million building? Well, the answer would come out of the performance measures. If the majority of the fires, if we have 2 to 3 structural fires a month, maybe 5 sometimes, are they sufficiently large to require for us to have bigger equipment? It's a valid question to ask. Just because someone who wears a badge does not mean that we cannot hold them also accountable to reduce costs. Now, Chief Gray is a person that I admire greatly. I cannot imagine anyone in that position being as responsive and being as open to communication. I think we have a fantastic leader there, and I admire all the people in the fire department who do that service for us. We depend on them. But just because they were a badge doesn't mean that they are not, to some extent, accountable to giving us performance measures so that you can make the right decisions, because it's about choices. And it is my hope that you bring this process of the budget process throughout the whole year, not just once a year. Thank you very much.
Vice Speaker Barriato.
Actually, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I had wanted to wait until we had the report from the acting director of finance relative to the $485,000 that was budgeted for one person on the fire staff.
Mr. Howard? If that is the limit of his comments?
If that's it. My concern is I didn't want to have the mayor put in jeopardy relative to the FPPC requirements on segmentation. So as long as it doesn't pull Fire Station 26 or Casa Verdugo back into the mix, or anything that may be arguably inextricably intertwined with that, it's certainly acceptable, again, legally acceptable.
Yeah,
You want to come back later?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
After that report is rendered.
Okay. And the last speaker, Aldo Mascaron. You asked for priority anyhow, so you're on.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, city council, and staff, my name is Aldo Mascheroni. To my right is Doug Wallace, who is our field development coordinator. Doug's got some books he's going to pass out to you, give you an idea what our program is about. Those are for you to keep. We thank you for this opportunity to speak to you on behalf of the American Youth Soccer Organization, AYSO Region 88, which is based in Glendale, La Crescenta. Before I supplement some of the issues raised by Mr. Abkarian on our behalf at last week's meeting, let me give you a little background information to provide some context for my remarks. AYSO is the largest youth athletic organization in the city of Glendale, with over 3,500 registered players for the 2000 season, which starts in August. We are a non-profit, all-volunteer organization, which means that no one is paid to deliver our program of child development through soccer. The coaches, referees, administrators, coach instructors, referee instructors, and field support personnel are all volunteering their time for free. Because of the involvement of the hundreds of adults donating their time, we are the low-cost provider of youth athletics in the community. The early registration fee this year was $80 for the 5th year in a row. In addition, we offer scholarships for low-income families in a VIP program for children with disabilities. In addition to a weekly practice starting in August and a weekend game starting in September through December, that $80 fee includes a uniform, a trophy, a team picture, an individual picture, a picture button for parents to wear, and a yearbook. But most importantly, it includes a lot of fun and new friendships. AYSO is open to anyone who meets the age requirements. There are no tryouts or residency requirements. No experience is required to sign up. Teams are balanced and reconstructed annually, so there are no dynasties or cliques of players and parents. Most importantly, everyone plays. At least a half a game in the older divisions and 3/4 of a game in the younger divisions. No players are relegated to sitting on the bench, no matter how skilled or unskilled they happen to be. My reason for this rather lengthy background information about who we are is to make you aware that we are equivalent of a city program for youth athletics. As you know, the City of Glendale does not run a youth soccer program, or for that matter, a youth baseball, softball, or basketball program. AYSO fills that void for soccer, the most popular youth athletic activity. Like a City of Glendale program, AYSO does not discriminate on the basis of race, religion, nationality, ability, or economic status. In addition to mandatory coach and referee training, we have mandatory safe haven training for all volunteers, consistent with the California Volunteer Protection Act, to assure that adults who have contact with children are qualified and aware of the proper conduct to avoid child endangerment and emotional or physical abuse. Our volunteers must complete extensive volunteer forms that require background information disclosures. Those forms are screened by the AYSO National Association, and anyone with a record of child abuse, any sex offenders, or anyone with a criminal history is not allowed to participate or as a volunteer, although their children are still eligible to play. The 3,500 players signed up for the 2007 season represent a 10% increase over last year and a more than 20% increase over the 2,900 players registered in 2005. Unlike the adult softball and soccer leagues run by the city, over 75% of those players have Glendale, La Crescenta zip codes and parents who are Glendale residents. AYSO doesn't run a recruiting campaign. You won't see banners at the grocery stores, ads in the local papers, flyers posted on the community billboard at the car wash, or shoved under your windshield wiper at a parking lot seeking players for AYSO soccer. The reason for not soliciting more participation is simple. We cannot accommodate more players because of the lack of AYSO soccer fields to practice and play in the city of Glendale. In 2006, we had 250 children of all ages on the waiting list to play soccer. AYSO did its part and could have provided the necessary additional volunteers to coach the teams and referee the games for those children, but those children did not get a chance to play because there were not enough fields to participate or to play games on. This season, with some cooperation from city and school administrators, there will be hopefully more time made available in the limited facilities within the city, and every child who wants to play the world's most popular sport will get the opportunity to do so. But allocating more time and more field space to AYSO for 2007 is just a stopgap measure and does not address the needs of the adults and the other soccer organizations in our community. In a city of over 290,000 residents, there are only 2 dedicated soccer fields. The 1996 recreation element of the City of Glendale General Plan found that Glendale had an extreme deficit of 38 multi-purpose soccer...
Please wrap it up. You've had 5 minutes already.
Sorry about that. The city has found the funds to renovate softball and baseball fields such as Shoal Canyon Complex, while the need for soccer fields continues to go unmet.
Thank you. Got the message.
Thank you for the opportunity
Mr. Quintero?
to give our comments.
What does it cost an average player per year to participate in AYSO soccer?
$80.
That's it.
That's it.
And what happens if, family of 4 or 5 youth just can't come up with the money? Do you have
We scholarship them.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming down.
You bet.
Okay, with
I had a question from
Mr. Yusefian.
Sir. There are many different sizes of soccer fields. What is the type of soccer fields you need the most? Do you need a full court, half court, quarter court, third court?
I've already asked for that information. I've been waiting for it.
Yeah.
Well, the beauty of it is...
you guys are generals on the field, so
Right. If
what do
you
you
build
need?
a full-size soccer field, we can cut it in half and play crosswise and use it for the under-10s.
Can't you
So
play it in thirds?
We can even do thirds and put
If it's 10 and under,
Exactly.
so you can't get 3 onto a full-size 1.5 acre soccer
You
field.
can't. I mean, if you look at the sports complex, the big field up there, the 5, you'll see the yellow lines on the sides there. That's so that they can play crosswise for the women's league and for the younger kids. So you get multiple use out of one of those big fields.
My concern, as Mr. Yusefian said, is what age bracket do you need the most of? That helps if we could build a 1.5 acre.
Right. We
want
need
to
the
split
big,
it into 2s or into 3s.
Right. We need the big field.
That's
for
what I
the,
needed
for
that
the older
information.
kids. And our under 19 program, which is the high school kids, under 16 and under 19, has gone from 2 teams last year. 4 years ago, to 9 teams this year. I mean, the older kids are off the streets playing soccer in our program.
And each one of those is 1.5 acres.
That's correct. And that field gets used by, well, I'm not sure if it's 1.5 acres. I know the dimensions of the field. I don't know.
No, I measured it.
Okay.
I calculated it out.
But, that field gets used by adults as well. So the way to go is to build the big field, and then we can divide it and use it when the older kids aren't playing or when the adults aren't playing. We can use it for the younger kids as well.
So if you had a magic lamp and you could wish for whatever, based on the number of participants you have, how many soccer fields you need? And it will meet your today's need, not tomorrow's, today's need. What it will be?
Well, we meet today's needs by using school fields whenever we can. Simply to meet AYSO's needs, we can do that today. We're doing it today, with the exception of the kids that are on the waiting list. But in order to meet the needs of all the other groups, because the competition to get the fields is actually greater than the competition on the fields when we play. To meet the needs today, we need the 2 fields that could be built in Area A and the 3 fields that could be built in Area C.
So you need 5 fields.
5 fields would be what the city needs right now.
1.5 acres each.
Well,
You're talking
the
full
space is
size.
there. That's correct. But
I'm just trying to understand, because I've asked for this information for over a month now.
yeah, I can't confirm the 1.5 acre. I can tell you that.
Well, I can
Okay.
confirm it. That's not counting parking or sideline, whatever. That's the soccer field itself.
There is enough. I mean, we started, AYSO on its own started the process of looking at Area A. And we were just about to commission a geological survey when we were told that it was possibly going to be an aquatic center.
Everybody has looked at that area.
Right. And you can get 2 fields, parking, and restrooms on Area A. You can get 3 fields, parking, and restrooms on Area C.
Well, could you get that information I've looked for over a month now?
It's actually in the old EIR for the sports complex,
How old is the old?
96.
Well, no, I mean users, 10 and under, 10 to
Give
12,
us what
12,
he's asking is
15.
demographics. That's what you have. You have how many kids that play,
And what age
what
bracket
age
do you
groups
have
they
there?
are.
We can
get that.
we can give you that. I mean, off the top of my head, I can tell you under 10 is the biggest, which is 8 and 9-year-olds.
Which takes,
Half.
in other words, if you had a 1.5 acre full size that you could use sometimes,
Right.
you could break it into the 3s and
Exactly.
triple the usage.
Exactly why
That's
we.
the kind of stuff that
Right,
I
and
need
that's
to
why
know.
we want to build big ones as opposed to little
So
ones.
you have statistics
Sure.
that can show me the numbers in each category.
Absolutely.
Then we know where the greatest need is, so instead, for me, instead of looking for a site to put a small one, I'm going to look for a big one
Right.
where it can be used as a 1.5 acre full size and then subdivide it into 2 or 3.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
That's
So
the most
that's the
efficient
numbers
way
I've
to
been
go.
waiting for.
You know, which is why we'd like you to put this in the capital improvements budget
The
sooner
other-
rather than later.
The other question is, you said that you were doing some geological studies in there. Why would you be doing geological studies? Are you suggesting that you will be participating partly in the financially to build these fields?
Right, we were going to try, I mean, we've been repeatedly told there's no money for the city to build them, and so we were looking and joining forces with other groups to try and do Area A on our own. It turns out that Area A was basically used as a dump when they built the freeway, and the cost is going to be $10 million probably at least, because you got to take all that stuff out and then regrade it.
And
Sure.
It's
between
expensive.
you and other groups, you have the means to do something of that nature?
Well, we think raising the money is the easier part of the whole process,
Okay.
because we have people volunteering to help.
Somebody record that part. He says raising money is
Well,
the
I haven't
easiest
proven
part.
it yet.
No, but you would not have to take it all out. You'd have to take out a certain depth, and if there's boulders, crush it and replace it, and compact it,
Yeah.
but not the whole canyon.
I mean, like I said, we stopped because we were told that the city was looking at putting an aquatic center in instead and going a different direction.
We've
And
talked about so many things, just like at Rock Haven, so many potential opportunities. That's why we pulled this stuff out, because we need to do a lot more studying, get a lot more input, like the geological studies. That factors into the cost. We haven't got to that point to be able to give a definitive answer. It'll be more important after we get the budget adopted, what we prioritize to go after first, second, third. Soccer fields first over libraries, or dog park over soccer fields. There's a lot of things to look at, and staff can only look at so many things at one time. So
Right,
at the
I guess-
proper time, we'll see you here.
what we're asking is that you, right, when you organize those priorities,
You got your priority.
put
and
them there, put them ahead of
all
dogs.
the emails I get on Rock Haven and Mountain Oaks, yeah, that's first priority.
Well,
So-
we would ask that you look at kids first. So,
Very important, very
Well,
important.
and my colleague is absolutely correct. I mean, there's too many needs in the city. I think what makes difference for me is issue of funding. I may not have people who are willing to pay for a dog park, or there may be some, but I don't know how much fundraising they're going to do. Money is the old saying, money makes the world go round. And the bottom line in here is not that we don't have a desire to do all these things, it's just so much money available. So when the private industry and the private associations, the ones who bring in more and try to partner with us the most and give us more money that we will be able to use, if it's $10 million and you put 5 on the plate, I'm 5 ahead of something else that has 0 money. So it all depends on how motivated your group and the other groups are, and ultimately it boils down to one thing. Does it translate into money? Because I've sat here for 6 years, and I watch groups come and they want things and they promise money, but when it actually comes down to writing the check, with the exception of Roosevelt Association, the rest of them don't write the check.
Well, remember,
So-
we did write a check for $50,000
I know.
towards the sports complex.
I know. But what I'm saying is, something like this is going to cost a lot more than $50,000. And that's something that you need to have to talk to your parents and the players and the future players and so on and so forth. But you have a lot of work to do, too. But it would be very helpful to me when you come in and say, the cost, we think it's X amount, and we can help you on behalf of AYSO X amount, and the other group can help this much, and so on and so forth, and then we see what the gap is. And that would be my thing. That's the work that you have to do.
And that's what we will do.
Because everybody understands, I don't care what the subject matter is, Mr. Sepian's right. If there's another partner coming into play and putting money in, it automatically gets a higher priority. Look right now at the 405 freeway north, all the talk that's going on about it in the lane taking houses out. There's $950 million, I guess, of federal funding sitting on that. And they choose, if they do not do something by 2009, they lose $950 million. There's a great incentive to prioritize that and move it ahead. It'll be the same thing in soccer fields or anything else you can think of. Contributing funds will get a council or a commission or anybody's attention.
Right, and we will do that. It's a little bit of a chicken-egg problem. We can't, in the abstract, raise money for soccer fields if we don't have some kind of a project to point to.
Now, bring me the chicken and egg. How's that?
Thank you, John.
I think with your support, we can make it happen. It's really important to us.
Okay,
Thank you for your support.
thank you. Now, Mr. Howard, if we stay away from fire stations and libraries, can the mayor come back?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, members of City Council, now that we've heard from the speakers and council has had the opportunity to ask some questions, I think it's appropriate to confirm that with regard to consideration and adoption of this fiscal year 07-08 CIP budget, the funding allocation for the reconstruction of Fire Station 26 and Casa Verdugo Branch Library is now confirmed and final, and that will not be the subject of any discussion relative to the adoption of this fiscal year CIP budget.
Oh, wait, you said 26 only? We can talk about 29?
Yes, 29 is not the subject of conflict. As long as you've made the final decision that the funding allocation, which is essentially a zero funding allocation in the CIP budget, is decided now, and that is, if it's not going to change, it can't change, then
Decided.
the mayor can come back
Mr.
in.
Right. Once again, we would propose that even 29 stay on the unfunded list and come back for
Yeah.
discussion at a later time along with all the other items on the list as
Raymond,
well.
we chose to remove it. You know what we did.
I did know, and I thank you for letting me know. And that suits me fine, actually. That way everybody's interests are preserved, so to speak.
It's good.
One other thing, Mr. Chair. Since I'm hearing that the contribution of funds to a project gives it a leg up, does that mean that my colleagues are willing to vote for the purchase of Mountain Oaks if the Santa Monica Conservancy comes up with half of it?
That's the subject of another day.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I'd say yes.
I know, I read the press today. Mr. Mayor, I guess you can come back now and take
Out
over.
of the penalty box.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Actually, he was very happy sitting right over there.
Unchained.
We're down to new projects funded?
Okay, and let me just clarify then, Mr. Starbird, where did we clearly, council expressed the interest regarding Station 26 in Casa Verdugo. Did we then all agree that the other items on the project not funded list are going to be removed from our discussions and taken for another day?
With two exceptions, we'll give you an update on, I'll call it Columbus Soccer Field, which I think will give you, it's a good example of what it costs to build a soccer field. It's a pretty basic, straightforward soccer field, and in this case, frankly, the land is free. So you get a sense of what a soccer field costs just to develop when you already have a piece of land. And frankly, that land, at least that we've discussed with the district staff, would be available in a ready-to-construct-on state. And then we wanted to come back and give you the follow-up work that Nancy Hunt Coffey has done on Brand Library and see if you want us to make some commitments on funding for that somewhere in the CIP. But first, though, maybe some overarching comments about the CIP that come to mind. I think for the first time in probably a long time, although this may seem to be a bit of a disjointed process with approving a preliminary CIP and then coming back later to talk about all of these priorities, intellectually it's probably one of the best build a CIP as a policy processes that we've seen here in Glendale, which is you gentlemen with the maximum amount of resources available and the most flexibility available, get to hear from your constituents on this whole range of projects, some of which for the first time we've heard just in the past week about a concept or an idea, and then give us your direction on your policies for the long term on what you want to give priority to. And I imagine it's going to take a lot of energy on your part. It'll take a lot of energy on your staff's part just gathering information. And we will try to do that in as objective a way as possible so we can bring you all the information you need. And I suspect you're going to hear from a lot of your constituents. Just like you've heard from AYSO, you will probably find out that there is quite a constituency out there for a dog park. And you will hear from those folks, and you will hear from swimmers, and you will hear from open space preservationists and the like. You'll probably get more input than you ever wanted. And at some point, you're going to get to decide how to allocate I think what you'll quickly find out is very limited resources, although the nominal dollar numbers sound pretty big. I'm looking at just the initial 5 years of the CIP, the way it's currently structured with the unfunded projects not funded. And you have available resources of about $44 million in 5 years, including all of the yet to be programmed and contingency funds in the CIP. But keeping in mind that about $30 million of that is GRA bond money, which will have some limitations on how that can be used. You'll find very quickly when we talk about new projects, whether it's building dog parks or building soccer fields, that money is not going to go very far. And of course, you have the other 5 years, the CIP, but as we all know, you get out beyond 5, 6, 7 years, and it almost falls into the realm of wishful thinking because who knows what state we'll be in and what the priorities will be 6, 7 years from now. So, but I think it really does bring an opportunity to the budgeting process that we haven't generally seen. And really, I think, gives you a refreshing opportunity, although a difficult one, to really set priorities for at least the next several years in terms of our CIP. So with that, let me suggest that maybe we first turn to Brand Library. And Nancy, why don't you review what you've done in the week following the last council discussion?
Very good. I'm happy to do so. Let me just get my PowerPoint up here.
So we're not doing page 5 anymore? We're not doing this? We're going to come back to this?
Yeah, we'll come back to this. We can do this after we've given this update.
Okay, so we go to the blue.
Okay. Very good. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, as you're aware, there were some questions about funding for the Brand Library. So I just wanted to review very quickly what we talked about last week and then talk about some possible funding options if Council is interested in pursuing them. Yeah, I'm having some trouble. There we go. So just to review, we currently have $3.78 million approved. It was approved in a prior fiscal year. We've done a lot of work with the Public Works Department to plot out the project at Brand, and this amount of money, while very generously given to us by the council, unfortunately would not cover a full ADA compliance, seismic retrofit, or reconfiguration of the interior space at the Brand Library. We do have a request for $4 million on the unfunded list. It's additional funding to cover the full ADA upgrade, the seismic retrofit, MEP, which is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and then some minimal interior and exterior improvements. Neither of these options would cover a full historic restoration or rehabilitation of the Brand mansion. I wanted to point out something on this slide. I made an error, well, sort of an error last week when I was talking to council, so let me clarify. Last week, I believe that I said that 4.3 or 4.4 million was needed for the basic option 1. And that is true if we never want to go back and look at a full seismic retrofit of the 1969 building as far as preserving the building. What we had talked about last week was with seismic having the Brand mansion, the older portion of the building, be seismically retrofitted to preserve life safety but also to preserve the building. And we had talked about the 1969 edition being seismically retrofitted just to preserve life safety. If that's all we ever want to do up there, it still is at the 4.4 million option. However, if we're going to have people come in and do seismic retrofitting, my understanding is if we ever want to do preservation of that 1969 extension, now's the time to do it. So that's why the figure is a little bit higher. So I just want to clarify that.
It's not bad, actually.
Yeah, I want to make sure that my numbers are square. So at the 4.7 level, which again is a little higher than last week, this would cover appropriate seismic retrofitting. I would do partial mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and ADA, the minimum to comply with the law. Okay, so again, we have $4 million that's currently on the unfunded list. The additional $4 million would get us everything that I just described in option 1. It would give us the full ADA, the full mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and the seismic retrofit. There would be a roof replacement, which is recommended. There would be minimum interior changes to improve efficiencies of the library, the staffing. We're hoping to be able to consolidate our desks a bit to provide a greater efficiency there. Some paint, carpet, exterior paint, and some basic landscaping on the outside. Now, we've also worked through with Public Works on an option 3, which would allow for full historic restoration of the Brand mansion. We currently have a grant that's outstanding to the California Cultural and Historic Endowment for $2 million, so that would close the gap between the $7.8 million option and the $9.8 million option. This option would actually do the full historic restoration of things that were unfortunately covered over or changed when the building was converted to the library and then when the 69 edition was added. The work that would be completed under option 3 would be based on the findings of a report that we did in conjunction with the Getty on the Brand mansion. As part of the CCHE, this California Cultural and Historic Endowment Grant, we've committed to provide an interpretive room if the grant is funded, so that's what this first bullet point is. We would also try to restore the surrounding landscaping to the kinds of plants and landscaping that was there during the Brand era. So just to review, the numbers that are in white is the funding that we currently have allocated in the CIP process from a previous year, and the funding that is in yellow is currently on the unfunded list. and the totals are here. So this gives you an idea of the years in which ideally the funding would come, and gives you an idea of the cost for all three options. I just wanted to throw in, there was some interest expressed at last week's council meeting about moving special collections, the sort of Glendale area history collection, to Brand. What I would recommend, and we'll go any direction that council directs us to go, but what I would recommend is, let me give you a little idea of the scope of the collection there. We have approximately 24,000 items that are part of special collections. A little more than half of them are cataloged, which means they are easily retrievable. Special collections currently takes up about 2,300 square feet. So it's a fairly sizable collection and takes up a good amount of space. So it's going to take us a little time to sort of work through the options there. What I would recommend is that we examine the possible relocation of that collection to Brand or another location. And at the same time, we evaluate the mission and scope of the collection. You know, we currently have the cat collection that's part of the special collections. We have a lot of California history, so beyond the scope of Glendale.
Do you have the doll collection, too?
No, we actually have a Marilyn Monroe collection as well, which I was unaware of until last week. So, you know, not a lot of light has been shed on special collections the last few years, so it's really time, I think, for us to go back and kind of look at our mission, what we're collecting there, evaluate the physical condition of the materials in terms of preservation, and evaluate the service needs. We're currently open 8 hours a week. We may want to look at expanding that. So at this point, I would recommend we sort of handle that as a separate process and bring a report back to you at a later date.
I have a couple of questions.
Councilor Yusefian.
The $7.8 million, does that deal with what Mr. Quintero was asking last week, which basically modifies the library so it's better utilized and so on and so forth?
Yes, I mean it's not an expansion by any means, but it's trying to use the space that we have in a more efficient.
Designing it more ergonomically so it's easier and more
fashion.
efficient. The second question is, if you do the option 2, then later on, can you go out and do the historic preservation part of it? Do you
Yes.
have to redo anything you did in the option 2 part? I mean, major? I know it'll have some disruptions on the inside where you have to deal with the fireplace. I understand that.
Right.
But outside of that fireplace, is there anything? I'm trying to see whether I'm being penny wise and pound foolish. I'm trying to see, I spent $7.8 million. Do I have to redo part of that $7.8 million when I go back and try to restore the historical integrity of the building?
My understanding, not being an engineer or a contractor, is that you wouldn't have to do anything major. That, you know, as we move along with option 2, we would obviously have to be very sensitive to the historic nature of the building. So we would be doing some
Restoration of stuff.
you know, preservation, I'll call it, as we go along, and that the additional $2 million we could sort of carve out as a separate project. It might be a little bit more, but my understanding is that it wouldn't be significant.
So we can wait for a grant to come in, and if it doesn't come in, then later on we can schedule it to be taken care of on that.
Mr. Starbird.
Well, Nancy, just to understand the numbers then, on option 1, the 4.7, to get there you need an additional $900,000.
That's correct.
Right? To get to option 2, assuming you've got $4.7 million in your pocket, to get to option 2 takes another $3.1 million, right?
Right.
And then likewise for option 3, assuming you had the $7.8 million in your pocket, you'd need $2 million more to get to option 2, or option 3.
Correct.
Okay. And then a quick question on special collections. How did we get things like the Marilyn Monroe collection, were they donated by people over the years? Is that how they came about?
Yes, I think it's a combination of things. A number of materials were donated to special collections. That's how the cat collection was originated. The Jewel City Cat Club donated their extensive collection of cat abilia to special collections. We also had a wonderful but somewhat eccentric librarian who was in charge of special collections for a number of years, and she did some collecting, I think, based on what she felt the needs for that room were. So as a result, we have any number of materials on semi-related topics.
You sure you don't have the dolls?
John,
We may.
There's
Mr.
like
Draymond.
150
Mr.
dolls.
Yusefian.
Look for those.
To also answer your question, Mr. Starbird, a lot of private businesses donated as well. My father had donated more than 1,000 items, photographic items, mostly to do with North Glendale, Verdugo Woodlands, Montrose, La Cañada, and so on, to that collection. And now I try to encourage people that if they come across interesting items related to our history, that they allow them to be at least reproduced with a copy donated to the collection. So.
And let me ask a question, Nancy. You were talking about that $2 million grant that would kick in to bring it from 7.8 to the 9.8.
Right.
Can that kick in to get us from the 4.7 to the 7.8?
No, I'd use it for that.
A little bit, because in order to do the, we'd probably do a smaller scope of the restoration. There's some things we'd have to do no matter what to the mansion in order to preserve it. And so, I'm trying to make this clear. What we would likely do with that $2 million, if that were the only additional money that we were to get at this point, is that we'd have to do some of the work that's laid out in the $7.8 million option, just to secure the building, make sure that it's preserved, that sort of thing.
Let me get this straight. If we decide to go to the option 2 to get to the 7.8, then are we automatically then going to be going to that third level because of the $2 million grant?
No.
If we get the grant, we would go to option 3.
Let her answer my questions, Mr. Starbird.
That brings to mind just something I think you need to keep in mind in terms of process, and this may be something we'll need to talk about as we get into the after adoption phase of these various priorities. But one is how we sort of categorize the priority and the timing for any of the projects that you want to try to accomplish. You may have a number of categories in which a project would fall. You'd like to do it, but only if you can get grant funding. You want to do it, and you know what? We're going to use the CIP general money, first come, first served, to get it done. That sort of categorization of projects, which you've been talking about as it relates to the grant and getting to possibly the option 3. The other thing is to keep in mind as we work through a lot of these projects that you're probably going to like everything you see, and I guess I'd encourage you to refrain from necessarily taking the first item that you like and committing the money only to find out later, there's another item you really like, and now you've got to go back and revisit the item that you said okay to earlier, in which case it's very painful to have a commitment of money in a year and then find out, you're getting pulled off again. And I suspect you're going to see a lot of that, because I think you're going to like everything that comes to you on the unfunded list, whether it's streets or soccer fields or libraries. You're probably going to like it. And if we look at the basic numbers in the CIP, I just did some quick math. And, for example, in 08-09, although we appear to have a great deal of money, $13,500,000, almost $11 million of that is the GRA bonds proceeds. And so you end up with a net, including the to-be program contingency, of somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.4 million. Of money you could utilize in year 2, and I presume this takes into consideration a few smaller items we've added back in, Ron?
Yes, it does.
So you got about $4.5 million, including your contingency, in 08-09. 07-08, you virtually have no funds available to spend. That's the upcoming year. 08-09, you've got maybe $4.5 million for everything. we get into...
Page, are you?
I'm looking at the CIP draft number 9, page 1 of 18. I'm just looking at those numbers.
Okay.
Those basic numbers. So my encouragement is, as you commit to projects, we'll have to know dollar amounts, and then we'll need to know sort of timing on these. And just be careful as you commit to the earlier projects. You may see something you like later on, and then we'll need to find a place for it as well. And you know, it's kind of painful to have to go back and revisit these things again. And also keep in mind, you may want to peg a project to, if we can get some additional resources of some kind or some additional grant, then we do it. If not, we may need to wait. Also, items that are not included in the CIP on the resources side, we don't have any park impact fees estimated. Park impact, library impact fees estimated, and that could be an additional resource that you could have in the CIP depending on your actions later on today. Oh, you do have impact fees estimated? We should review that with you so we know the implications of that. The second thing is, I don't think we've anticipated grants except to the extent that we know that they're available. So you don't have grant monies reflected.
So you're telling us to go easy on the library at this
Well, no. I don't want to do that. I'm just saying the library, because it's kind of the first one, and I know there's a lot of interest probably in trying to get to option 3 at some point, somehow. I'm just encouraging you to be careful, because you're going to run into those dynamics where you're going to hear after July 1 a lot of needs that you're also going to want to try and get to.
Mr. Sefian.
Hearing the city manager, I will tell you, and knowing that this year we'll have about $8 million surplus on the general fund as we close the books. Even though I don't live in Northwest anymore, but knowing that Pasadena just spent over $150 million redoing their city hall, our city hall is not exactly like Pasadena. I mean, our forefathers were very, very frugal, so they were very penny pinchers. But one of the few buildings we have in this city that is of significance is the Brand Library. Talk about history, we're talking about L.C. Brand and Brand Boulevard and responsible for bringing a lot of people in and so on and so forth. I think we have delayed this project for over 15 years. And I don't want to wait until the earthquake damages this building before I say, gee, I could have done it, I didn't do it. I think in order for us to do this option 2, which I like to go to, which basically does two things, which deals with the ADA issue, and we hear about ADA every day. I think it would be foolish for us to do $4.7 million worth of work and then do not replace the roof, and then it leaks and it destroys things and it costs us more money. And as you do exterior work and you do any kind of a retrofit, I can tell you you're going to create problems with the roof. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. I don't care how you do this. You're moving things around, you're trying to level the building up, and you're jacking it up, and you're going to be cracking things all over the place. So for my money, I think what I would like to see is for us to contribute $2 million in the CIP this year from general fund reserves that we will have about 8, put $2 million into the CIP to fund the first $2 million, and then put another $2 million next year's from the CIP's 4.5, then you still have 2.5 left over, and then she will have at least the 4.7 to get started with the retrofit. If we give her the go-ahead today, how long would it take you to start working? 6 months, 8 months?
Probably 6 months minimum.
Okay. So it's going to take a minimum of 6 months to get going on this thing. So by the time we get to the point that we need to use the other $2 million, I think we will probably be in better shape, because we'll probably realize some savings in the following year. I mean, that's my. I mean, we talk about. I did get a lot of letters about Rockhaven and saving our history and so on and so forth, but I think this is the grand poobah of histories in this city when it comes to history. So,
Well, I would echo some of that. At a later date, though, I would like to discuss it further, because there's one thing about preserving history. The Brand Library is there. It's not in threat of being lost forever. There are certain historic elements in the city that are on our list that we run the risk of losing them entirely before we ever get to talk about preserving them, or 50 years down the line, or 100 years down the line.
7.8 will knock that building out like nothing.
So
Well,
that's
7.8 will what?
Earthquake.
Oh,
Knock that building out.
7.8 earthquake.
so. What I'm saying is the answer is not always will there be an earthquake. Of course there will be. But you can't base the preservation of the history of a city solely on whether or not there'll be an earthquake, and at the same time dismiss every other historic element that could be lost, not because of an earthquake, but because of future development. So I'm not negating what you're saying, Councilmember Yusefi, and I agree with it, just saying that I'd like to discuss it more.
Which plan you like, the 4.7 or 7.8?
Well, frankly, I'm currently leaning toward option 2 as well, but it was just the comment that because it is historic, that therefore it is somehow more historic than other potential sites. That's all. In other words, the fact that I lean toward option 2 doesn't mean that I would necessarily prioritize this financially ahead of every other project like Rockhaven or other potential projects.
So would you suggest that we pull this back into the unfunded list of those, whatever, 10 or so projects? I'm sorry?
It's on the unfunded, all of the additional funding needs are on the unfunded list.
Correct. This is already on the unfunded
And so
list. It's not
what
funded.
you have reflected in the budget for 07, 08, 08, 09 is the million and the 2.8. If you wanted to supplement the 9 or any of the items in yellow, Nancy's done a nice job of painting a picture of this. To go farther than the 3.8 would take the numbers in yellow there. And I guess the question that's being posed is, do you commit to that now and have us plug it in, or do you hold as you get into further projects after the adoption of the CIP?
Mr. Quintero.
I'm also for option 2. That's the only thing that really makes sense, and hopefully eventually we'll get to option 3. However, I don't want to jump the gun and make a commitment like this until the bigger picture is kind of taken care of in terms of some of the things we talked about earlier in the morning.
So that's somewhat contradictory in whether we want to deal with it now and commit the funds or put it back with our group of to-be-discussed projects.
Well, for me, I assume in the next few weeks, certainly in the next month, 6 weeks, we're going to be making some decisions and talking about some of these unfunded needs. Right. So that's all I'm saying. I don't mean hold it off for another year, but as we get a more clear picture of where we're headed, this will certainly be one of my top priorities.
Well, let me just sort of summarize what I think I'm hearing from council is that some have expressed a preference to the extent that we'd like to upgrade the library. However, at the same time expressing that preference, option 2, hold that over and keep that with our bundle of items that we'll be discussing at our later meeting after the budget is passed. That's what I thought I heard from Mr. Quintero. Mr. Draymond.
Yes, I am opting to take a different option 1 for the wise and sagacious advice of our city manager that we should look at all of these items, because we're going to see some things that we like, and I have expressed an opinion and my preference of these lists, but I also want to look at some of the historic and preservation items in a more comprehensive way, and if it isn't going to drag out for more than a matter of some weeks, then I'd like to be able to do that. And I'd also like to hear from the rest of my colleagues with their input. So.
Okay. Mr. Yusefian, when you were towards option two?
I'm for option two. I have a different opinion, which is all fine. I'm pretty sure that the prevailing council wants to discuss this later on, which is fine. We may end up there, but I have watched this project for a long, long time, and this project has been robbed several times from the money that was allocated because they felt somewhere else the money is allocated. I want to be like Pontius Pilate. I'm going to wash my hands off of this. So when something happens to this building that currently is our building, which currently has a large number of people coming to the place and using it, one of the largest after our main branch library. If something happens and people get hurt because we did not do the retrofitting, we're spending $12 million, or what is it, $12 million now on this building, which some consider it modern, historic maybe. I would say this one is more historic in my mind than this other birdcage design. Nevertheless, I would say for us not to even put the money in to retrofit it, we can talk about it all day long, but in the end of the day, we're going to have to make a decision. It's not fun. I like to preserve a whole bunch of other stuff too, but let's preserve what we already have before we go to preserving something we don't have. And to me, this is a safety issue. This is a seismic retrofit. This is ADA issues. This is saving the roof. I mean, we're not talking about doing something major. Plumbing, so people can flush the toilets and people don't get electrical shocks. It's all right. We can deal with it in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. My experience has been in this council is every year the city manager comes, and this goes back to the previous city manager. They come and say, we need to get this thing approved by June 30th. We have a charter mandate, and we got to get it done. And every council before me, and when I was on council, we have done that. We get it approved, and the same colleagues of mine who talk about coming back and sitting and spending the time to discuss all the stuff, it's summer vacation, they got to go here, they got to go there, and so on and so forth. And next thing you know, those conversations never take place, and then we are here again a year later.
I just want to remind Mr. Yusefian that Pontius Pilate washed his hands after the vote was taken, not before. Mr. Yusefian, Mr. Stubbard.
I'll do better than Pontius Pilate.
That's encouraging.
Mr. Mayor, I'm wondering if given what I sense is the drift, if you at least wouldn't want to plug in numbers to make sure that option one is committed to and funded, which is an additional $900,000 in 08, 09, Nancy. And there's capacity in the general fund, but it would seem to me that's at least a level that I'm not sure you'd want to knock off versus any other priorities that might arise.
I'm going to go to Mr. Weaver and then back to you.
Missed a little bit, but option two, I think, has to be the way to go. Anything else on there is a lower priority for the future, not to dismiss, but full historic restoration could be down the road somewhere. Whether you decide here to do today, want to discuss it as one of the first priorities after the budget's adopted, it's okay with me, but as Mr. Sevens says, this has been discussed for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a seismic issue. I'm willing to put that money in that you say, Ms. Stubbard, to at least hold option one. That's what you're talking about, right? To make sure that
My
part
suggestion
is
is at least what I hear the drift is high commitment to finding a way to get to option two.
Right.
So let's do it in the context of all the other needs you're going to hear about. I'm suggesting make a commitment at this point, recognizing all the other needs, to the option one, so we plug in $900,000 in 08, 09.
Yeah, I agree to that, and then make it one of the first priorities that because it's an easier priority to work on than some of the others we got coming down the pike. I mean, there's not going to be the loyal opposition standing up here and attacking, doing
Retrofit.
option two, retrofit, not like some of the other issues. So I think we ought to discuss it one of the first things afterwards.
I'll agree with the engineer.
Mr.
Uh-oh.
Well, no.
This is
I don't-
dangerous precedence.
I don't agree with that observation, Mr. Starbird. I mean, we're going to put away 900,000. I'm only interested in option 2. There's no way I'm just going to spend that kind of money for option 1 and then leave the rest of the interior the way it is. So, I mean, I don't see any need to do that.
To clarify, Mr. Quintero, I said I'm willing, if my colleagues want to discuss as one of the first ones after the budget, fine. I don't want to hear it's low priority and it's not going to come back for 6-9 months. One of the first back, because it's an easy one, relatively easy one to deal with. But we got to find a way to get to that option 2.
So your recommendation is to do 900,000 right now, and then as we come back, we discuss the option 2.
Yes, one of the first
Outfunded.
priorities of the unfunded. Get it wrapped so we can.
So at least the option
Take
1
it.
is funded.
Yeah, but we got to get to option 2. Get it done and out of the way.
And not leaving it open for the upgrade to the option 2.
What do you mean?
Leaving your mind open. We're going to vote to fund the 900 to get us to the level of option 1. But
I want option 2.
Mr. Quintero has expressed an interest that he is supporting option 2, but that's something that we'll discuss and deal with when we
The
come
funding
back.
source, where's it coming from?
Mr.
We're not going to sell
Starner.
it today,
I'll
so
just-
I think after.
Just very quickly, I'm not suggesting nor recommending that you don't support option 2. So I don't want my comments to be construed in that way.
No.
My suggestion is, it seems to me like there's no question you want to do option 1, at least. Now, you may make a different decision later and do option 2 or even option 3. But as a minimum, if we're going to commit to option 1, that takes an additional $900,000, correct, Nancy?
That's correct.
And that we plug that in and take it off the table now, even though later on you may say, now let's go to option 2 or option 3.
Well, when it comes to option 2, though, then we're going to start to weigh in the additional increase in cost.
That's right.
As compared to other
That's right.
projects we go on. That's the only
Right.
nut we got to crack.
Right.
And by then, it will be June 30 or July, you would have your final number on what the reserves are for this year.
To see if we
and
wanna
you may
pull.
decide to put some of that stuff into this. I mean,
And it may be multi-year.
right, it has to be.
Mr. Starbird.
That's right. And what you're going to hear if we get to the general fund overview part of this discussion today, you're going to hear a projection on the year-end balance, which, as Mr. Yusevian indicates, we anticipate will be in the neighborhood of $8 million surplus savings at the end of this year in the general
There you
fund.
go. Then
And you
spend.
can take whatever direction you wish, which is keep it in the general fund, shift it over to CIP, or do something else with it if you so wish.
Or just hold it until we get to
Right.
this topic afterwards.
Exactly.
And then
Mr.
pull the
Draymond.
money.
Right. I think I'm pretty much hearing the same thing from everyone. Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable way to proceed. And we'll get with the option 1, partial mechanical and electrical and plumbing, so maybe we'll hit all of those exploding light switches and malfunctioning toilet flushes and
Then
so
we'll
on. With that,
put a roof on later on to stop anything from shorting
I think
out.
that all it's going to do is give us funding source for now, and then we have to go back there. Having remodeled homes, I can tell you, every time you open up the electrical and the plumbing, you find out things behind walls you have never imagined people do to their house.
Okay, so do
Or
we have
contractors.
we have direction on that?
What I hear is a consensus on committing to the 900,000 in 0809, and then high priority for option 2, but that'll be discussed when you take up the other items that are on the unfunded list after July 1.
I just want to say I appreciate the concerns of the seismic events and the seismic retrofit, and it's unfortunate that just a week or two ago, the same concerns that I raised were not given the same weight on another project.
we may
The
come to
reservoir
that. We may
issue.
come to that tonight.
Oh,
We may
we're
come
dealing
to
with it
that.
tonight. Don't
I
worry.
understand, but
Okay, we're
they
dealing with
were,
it tonight.
I think I got the short shrift last time. I think the seismic issue is an important issue for the library, so I think that's where we are with that.
Okay.
Let's, thank you, Nancy.
With that, let me suggest
back?
that you get, well, we can go back to slide 5 of the red PowerPoint, and maybe note the 3 items that we did incorporate into the funded portion of the CIP, and then give you Ron's done a nice job, as he usually does, of sort of summarizing the picture of the CIP and some tables that you may want to see. But I do want to have George give you an update on the discussion about soccer fields. We can go on to slide 5, or we can take up George, whichever you wish. Why don't we note quickly the projects that we've included in the CIP, Ron, that we noted last week?
Let's go through this
Okay.
slide.
Yes.
Sure. On slide 5 on the PowerPoint, we have included 3 more projects into the CIP from the last time that we had the discussion. Stengel Field for $200,000, Montrose Shopping Park landscaping for $130,000, and then CSI fire data of $125,000. CSI is our integrated new computer system that integrates GIS and permitting and so forth. So this brings over the fire data and will basically make this more of a complete project with all the data that we have here in the city. So these are the new projects. I won't go through all the slides. I updated the slides from when we had our initial CIP discussion in mid-May, but on this basic CIP, which includes these 3 projects that I went over, here's the graph of the revenues and the expenses. The revenues are in yellow, and you can see the 3 years where the GRA bonds come into play. They are in 08, 09, 9, 10, and 10, 11, and then the GRA bonds fall off, and we have our expenses that are currently in this basic CIP listed out in green, so you can see the excess capacity we have in there where we have not allocated to all the projects. We have, for these 10 years, approximately $75.2 million that is unallocated in our general fund CIP. So that's the differential on this slide between the yellow and the green bars. And this is another way of looking at this, is looking at the $75 million. The yellow here is our ending fund balance, and then the blue is our to-be programmed, where it starts off at $1 million for the first 2 years and then increases to $3 million. And if we don't program those funds or use them as contingency, that grows over time to the $26 million. So it's 26 plus the 49.
Don't hold your breath.
Right. But as far as this 10-year plan is concerned, we have $75 million in unallocated funds.
It's the only slide that makes you feel good, but it's not going to happen.
It could be easily programmed. That is correct. I won't go through the rest of the slides. They are just updated numbers.
Yeah, they're pretty much the same.
It's the same presentation that we gave 4 weeks ago.
Although it would be useful to remind you, Ron, skip forward one more slide. Your focus naturally is on what we call the general fund portion of the CIP, which is the portion of the capital program that you have the most flexibility. We do need to keep in mind, however, there are considerable projects that are funded out of special funds that can only be used for specific purposes: gas tax, CDBG, GRA, transit, parking, sewer, refuse. They're listed here. Those projects are all in your CIP, and you've touched on them briefly before, but just a reminder that there is a whole lot of other projects out there that don't involve recreation and parks and the likes that are identified in your CIP and relate to things like the sewer fund and refuse and GWP and all of that, just as a reminder. And when you approve the CIP, you've approved all of those from a policy standpoint. Again, they don't all happen in the first month, and if there's issues or questions that arise, we can always revisit it. And every one of those major projects comes back to you, again, for review and approval individually.
Page 15. Can you go to 15? 15? Question. There's a 14% total tax revenue. That's equates to what, 3.4 to 5 million? That's the 14%.
Might be easier to say, what is our total sales tax, Ron? 28, 29 million?
Our total sales tax, if you take both the sales tax and the ERAF in lieu of sales tax, is approximately $31 million.
So every 1% is roughly $300,000.
Right. And so this represents 14% of the total.
Okay. What I was going to ask my colleagues, if they would like, remember when we generated the 14% originally, is because that was what we transferred things around, and that's the number we came up with. But at that point, there was some talk. We talked about trying to increase that percentage as we go along, so this way we have more money in the capital improvement, so we can start doing more projects. I tend to think that maybe a 1% increase may not be that much, but at least we kind of start ratcheting that up, because we're starting to see a lot more in general fund reserves, and we have CIP is where we are having problems now, because we don't have enough money on that. So,
Mr. Weaver.
Yeah, I'd like to extremely much do that, but right now I'm concerned with the general fund, with the UTT, other issues that are out there. I don't know. We could be $4 million down in the hole, approximately, I think, if the UTT court goes south on us, court decision goes south on us. So the uncertainties out there right now would preclude me from wanting to change that.
I think it would certainly warrant more discussion to understand the full ramifications, Mr. Starmer.
Well, I agree with all of that. You have some tremendous pressures in the general operating fund as well. But, for example, the treatment of the year-end savings, and generally speaking, there have been aberrations. But for the most part, we have some considerable savings each year in the general fund. For example, this year will be roughly $8.5 million, Ron?
Correct.
How you utilize that can have a much greater impact than carving out 1% more in operating, which means we've got to go into the original budget and begin, frankly, cutting programs that at the end of the day, we know we generate some savings, and the allocation of that savings in a way that will have a greater impact on the CIP. So a policy where, for example, you take a portion of year-end savings, and part goes to reserves, part gets allocated in the CIP. This year, you're going to have $8.5 million in year-end savings. If you had increased your percentage by 1 or 2%, if you just put half of that into the CIP, you'd make up 4 or 5 years of the effort that you might undertake here.
Right.
So you can have a bigger impact without having to go in and carve up operations. to do
The
it.
only reason I'm suggesting that is because when we did this, I think about, 4 years ago?
Well, we've gotten
That's
here really
what
over the...
we talked about, so I just wanted to go over it. I mean, if there's a desire on behalf of the council to move in that direction, fine. If there isn't, I agree with Mr. Weaver that we we have some
There's
challenges
some
coming
huge
up.
challenges on the horizon.
So it's just that
Mr. Oliver.
I'll remind Council, you already mentioned the UUT for the wireless. That could be upwards of $5 million. Back in January 2006, Council passed a resolution that changed our general fund reserve policy. And in that reserve policy, it stated that any general fund reserves in excess of the 35% will be transferred to the capital improvement. We are not there yet, and we will come close this year with this 8.4, but we'll still be below the 35%. So you have that as already built into your financial policy, that once we get above 35%, we're going to automatically transfer the excess to the CIP as a resource. So I hear what you're saying, Councilmember Yusefian, but we also have that, and it's a will.
So did I.
Yeah, thank you for reminding
And then that policy economically has a much greater impact on the CIP if we continue to have the level of savings that we've been generating each year. And we've generally had that.
Mr. Weaver.
Yeah, I just want to make a general comment, because people will start thinking that the city is doing a lousy job in their budgeting when you can have an $8.5 million surplus. But that's not the case. If the city could forecast 12 months into the future accurately, we wouldn't have a surplus, we'd be balanced. But when unexpected things happen, we get additional revenue sources, taxes, sales tax or whatever goes up and changes the whole thing, and we have vacancies not filled and people leaving and whatever. Expenditures can decrease, revenues can go up. That's one of these years. It's not a question of poor budgeting by the city council. Is that true, Mr. Stubbard?
I like to have problems like that every day.
Yeah, if we had it every day.
I agree.
Yeah.
I will tell you that my philosophy on budgeting is you want to be very conservative. You want to the extent reasonable, overestimate your possible expenditures, underestimate your possible revenues. At the end of the year, if we're off, we always want to be positive. We never want to be negative. And that's been the tradition in Glendale for many years before me. So, and it has served us well.
Mr. Starbird, after we close out this budget cycle, and we'll know exactly how much we have in surplus that's going to our reserves to reach that 35%, and at the time that we discuss our list of unfunded CIP projects, if we can get a forecast, Mr. Allers, as to what, of course, a forecast is only worth so much, as to what we're going to be expecting in the next 5 years as we start to spill over our surplus, again, unknown surplus, forecasted surplus into our CIP fund, so we'll know how much money we're looking at as we decide to allocate resources to our list of unfunded CIP projects. I mean, that might be a good time to bring it into a...
Mr. Mayor, if I can, I understand what you're saying, and we'll talk about this when we bring it back. We always, frankly, there's a tendency to want to predict the savings each year at levels like we're experiencing this year. We had one year where we were $13 million savings in the general fund. A large part of that had to do with the way we were accounting for the interest earnings in our GASB 33. But we'll try and always take a comfortable position that we can usually anticipate 1 to 1.5% savings. That's kind of a minimum floor that we're fairly comfortable saying we can generally depend on. Above that, one never knows. If we have a year in which we get a lot of positions filled, departments are up to snuff on their various positions, we don't have a lot of people retiring or leaving, that savings can drop significantly in a year. Most of it, a large part of it, results from, frankly, positions not being able to be filled in the course of the year just because of natural turnover and the time that it takes you to fill positions. But so we'll always try and be very conservative. Fortunately, we, for the most part, almost always beat the 1 to 1.5%. Just because of our very conservative nature of budgeting.
Well,
but we can certainly try and predict that.
Come back to us with that and let us know what...
We just need to be careful how we start depending on it.
Understood. Okay, then. Do we want to go to Mr. Chepshin?
Yes.
Actually, I have a question. Just on page 8 of 18, CIP draft number 9. When you go down to the GC3 project set aside, I see $8,213,000. That's money that the redevelopment agency is contributing to what?
Bill, Lands of Fame.
Page 8 of 18, GC3 project.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, in 2000, the City Council and Redevelopment Agency entered into contractual agreements with the Disney Company to set aside 75% of the tax increment that is generated that would then be reinvested in public improvements to provide more capacity. That is that set aside, and what we do is we budget it out every year, and then it's held in a separate fund.
So you haven't identified the specific projects that would be used for, but we take it out of our normal income stream, so we're not spending it on something that we can't use it for.
And let's get specific on the public improvements. So public improvements are limited to the Disney-owned property or contiguous to the Disney-owned properties, right?
The public improvements are in and around their property. It's streets, sewers, telecommunications, electric, water, all of those types of improvements that would allow capacity to take place.
But it's not money, for instance, if you go on the other side of the freeway, away from their property. We don't use this money for the
It's for that northern corridor.
Generally north of the 134. But it was a pretty long list of possible
That's
public
right.
improvements.
And each project is called out, and it is triggered by development that takes place in that area.
There was a pretty specific list of the kinds of projects that could be funded for that. I think we're anticipating a portion of this helping to fund the railroad improvements north of the 134, for example. So there is some flexibility, but not as much as you have in your general tax increment revenues.
But this number is based on the current projects that are there. So as they build more of those projects, the number is going to go higher.
If they speed up their development, which we expect will likely happen, these numbers could increase. These are, again, a pretty conservative estimate of their construction schedule.
In the later years, obviously, those are just that, estimates of what we think development will be.
Okay. Back to the task.
Mr. Chapman, maybe an overview of Let me preface this by saying that we told you last week when questions arose about soccer fields and tennis courts that we were meeting with Dr. Escalante and his staff with the district. We had that meeting, a good productive meeting, and I'll say that the staff of both agencies came to a collective recommendation that we would make to our respective boards. That doesn't mean that you and the school district board are necessarily going to approve in that direction. But we had come to grips with what we felt would be reasonable business terms if we were to proceed with development of a soccer field at Columbus School. And that's what you see here. George will review those. Probably one of the biggest challenges on this site that I came away with was just one of timing. In order for them to make the property available to us for a soccer field, and of course they would use the soccer field as their play area when school's in session, they need to relocate the existing school, which is currently where you see the soccer field, over onto the northwest or northeast corner of the site where you now see the blue and yellow buildings. They would need to construct a new school, move into the new school, vacate the old facilities, and the understanding we had with Dr. Escalante and his staff is they would deliver us a site that is rough graded, means all the existing buildings demolished. That would be the school district's obligation. Any utilities needing to be relocated, any subterranean structures that needed to be removed, those would all be the district's obligation, and they would deliver to us a rough graded site, essentially then ready for final grading and construction. Really takes what was a big question mark of costs off of our plate and puts it onto theirs. The drawback is they anticipate 2 years from today before they'd be able to make the site available to us. So if there were some thinking this could happen very quickly, it would be 2 years before we'd be able to come in and do construction. Would take us probably 8 months or so.
For construction?
For construction.
A little bit longer than that.
So figure a year for construction for us. So that means a soccer field available to play on is somewhere outside of 3 years away.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jim, if I may, we can design it. I mean, the whole project, design and construction, would take about a year. So we can come in and build it as soon as we have the design ready.
And what's build period?
Yeah, about 6 months we can get that done.
So 2.5 years before you'd have play on the site. On the other hand, is Georgia review based on our understandings with the staff. And again, the school board hasn't approved it. I think economically, probably one of the most cost-effective sites on which we could put a soccer field, just from the standpoint of the land's virtually free.
What's the acreage?
I think it's a little bit under an acre. It's about, a little bit over an acre. I think it's about 46,000 square feet. It's 100 by 55.
So you'll never get a full size, so you're...
Well, it is. It's actually a full size. It's 100 yards by 55 yards. It's full size, high school size. It's not FIFA size, which is like 140 by 70, but it's adequate for AYSO's use and other community group uses.
I was wondering if it's big enough to subdivide into 2 or 3.
Sure. Yeah, I think it could be going this way. Yeah.
So it's 100 yards by 150 yards?
It's 100 yards by 55 yards wide. Okay. So it's about 49,000 square feet.
So you're over an acre. Yeah. And that doesn't include the sidelines and the setbacks and everything?
No, it doesn't include also the parking lot.
Okay, so the total site's about an acre and a half?
I would
more
say,
than an acre and a half?
Yeah.
But to do this, how long is it going to take us to negotiate it with the school board? A year?
Well, I think as Mr. Starbird...
Pacific Edison took a long time just to negotiate the terms.
No, I think as Mr.
Yeah, it wouldn't take that long.
No.
One, we have a basic agreement in place, so this would just become an appendix to.
Right.
And again, Dr. Escalante indicated that he's willing to recommend this to the school board.
That doesn't mean it's going to be accepted.
No, it doesn't mean it's going to be accepted. And, of course, we'd need to get the reaction from them, and you'd need to take action at a formal meeting to approve that agreement. But at least at the staff levels, we have an understanding as to what the basic terms would be.
And where would you park the vehicles?
There's a new parking lot. Why don't we have George run through the schematic here for you?
Where's the arrow here? Parking is right here.
A 50-space lot, as I recall?
Yeah, right here and here, a little bit north of it, would be the parking for the joint use.
Surface parking?
Yep.
It is surface parking, yeah. In the daytime, the teachers would park here, parents. Evenings and weekends, we would get the field from 4 o'clock to about 9. We recommend we install lights here, or try at least. There's an issue of, as you know, there's this right here, the housing complex here, but it's very transient. This would be the issue for lighting, although with new lighting...
Could use the new lighting.
Right, it may not be such an
My
issue.
concern is more with parking.
Well-
And currently, once in a while, I go to Burger King, and as I drive around, try to find a place to park so I can eat, there is not a single parking space, so I just kind of drive back into the Burger King's parking lot and just park there.
This
and
would
eat.
be one of the better parked sports facilities
Yeah.
and school sites, actually. And I might point out in our discussions with Dr. Escalante and his staff, we, the city, would be responsible for about two-thirds of the parking costs. They'd be responsible for about a third. They'd use it during school hours.
Right.
The entire parking would be available to the public when the field's open.
Now,
Yeah.
they have always complained about security. How does this...
We did discuss that.
Yeah, the understanding there is that our objective was to have the campus open. There are basketball courts on the interior of the campus, and we suggested that generally the first position the district has taken historically has been to fence off the campus and the buildings from the sports facilities. That incurs additional cost, plus it keeps the campuses closed. Dr. Escalante indicated a willingness to recommend to the board that in this case the campus remain open during the times that the soccer field is open, that there not be any fence dividing the soccer field and closing off the balance of the campus.
So how people could get in there?
Well, they'll get in there through the parking lot and see the little parking lot that goes to the north. There wouldn't be a fence there. Now, there'd be a fence that could be gated, but it wouldn't be gated, and there wouldn't be a fence installed dividing the soccer field from the campus. If it became a problem in the future with vandalism or issues that we couldn't mutually address, then the district would have the right to come in and install a fence at their cost to close the campus off. But there'd be language that would say we would use best efforts to resolve any issues that arose so the campus could remain open.
While the school is in session, would people be using that soccer field?
No, it would be theirs while school's in session. It would be like an elementary school playground.
So the only time that soccer field is going to be used is when the school is closed?
Right, after school and on weekends.
From 4 o'clock to about 9 o'clock, and on
That's
weekends
generally what
all day.
happens with a
Right.
campus field now.
Well, and in our fields also. I mean, if you go to the sports complex, a lot of the use gets started after school.
After kids are out.
So 3:30, 4 o'clock is when the sports complex starts getting used.
And-
Mr. Starr,
And have you worked out, now this will be a turf?
this would be, we would recommend artificial turf.
Artificial. So this will be artificial, so
Right.
you're still going to have some plumbing put in there.
Oh, yeah.
Because you want to cool off the thing, so you need sprinkler
Right.
system. You're going to have lighting, so electrical. Are we going to have separate meters installed, so we pay for the electricity
Yes.
and?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we will deal with the maintenance, we will deal with the electrical and the plumbing and building this, and also two-thirds of the
Parking.
Right.
the parking
We might
and the
note-
maintenance of the parking also?
Well, yeah, and I think
Restrooms, too.
part of the agreement was that if they leave this open, we would maintain the field. We'd come and also pick up the trash litter, before school starts on a Monday or so.
Okay.
But if they decide that they want to fence it, and they would fence it right along here, I think, then they would pick up half the cost of the maintenance.
No,
I think.
we didn't reach agreement on that.
Well, that was what we discussed, but
Yeah, we didn't
our
re-
intent was to keep the campus open.
Right, but we didn't reach
Yeah.
agreement on that.
But if you fence it, would the kids still be able to go and play there?
No.
During
Well, they
the day?
wouldn't be able to play on the playground if they fenced it. That's why our objective was to keep the campus open.
Yeah.
In my view, personally, I think the district has as great an obligation to the constituents who paid for the campuses after the schools are closed as they do while the schools are in session, and they are a significant resource. So our objective was, let's get this campus open, not just for soccer, but so kids can use the playground for other things. Dr. Escalante is supportive of that. There is a concern about vandalism and the trash being left on Mondays. There's also a recognition that kids are jumping fences now. I mean, to think that you're keeping kids who want to create mischief off the campuses by a 5-foot chain link fence, I think we all realize is nonsense. It isn't happening. Kids are getting onto the campus, especially kids who want to create mischief. They can create mischief if they want to. The good kids who won't hop the fence, though, they don't have an outlet for play. So the view here is, let's try this experiment where the campus is open, there's no fences dividing it, we'll both try our best mutually to resolve any issues that arise.
Would there be a fence between the street or the sidewalk?
Oh, yeah, the campus would be fenced like it normally is.
Okay.
Yeah, the campus would be fenced.
And just so I'm clear, would this fall under the broad category of school-city cooperation?
Absolutely.
Okay,
the
because we
truest
hear a
sense.
lot about, failure to cooperate, and
Yeah.
I think,
Let me say
to
from
be
the
clear,
district-
I think
let
this
me-
is where we are going at
Let me
this
say
point.
from the district standpoint, the issue of timing aside, their willingness to give us the site in a rough graded condition removes a huge question mark that was previously there when we first started talking about the concept of this being a soccer field. They're being responsible for the old buildings, for any asbestos issues, toxic issues that are there. Recently, it came up that there's apparently a significant utility vault on the site that services the buildings that needed to be relocated. That was a fairly considerable cost estimate. Their staff and Dr. Escalante saying that's part of their responsibility removed a huge question mark about costs on the site for us.
And I do want to comment that I have seen Dr. Escalante several occasions in the past week, and he seems to be very excited about this and with the prospect of cooperation with the city. And I guess once you take politics out of certain issues, they seem to get moving forward a little more quicker than with politics involved. Mr.
Any
Quintero.
restrooms?
Yes. George, I'm sorry, Mr. Quintero. Mr. Yusefian asked me quickly, are there any restrooms?
Right here,
Maybe point
right here
out.
would be the restroom.
There would be,
and we would have to build that
one of the
restroom.
restrooms, and we'd be responsible for that.
Kids are not using that during the school.
Well, this doesn't exist right now.
Oh, I see.
But in terms of whether the kids would be using it, I think they would during school hours.
And we need to work out maintenance issues and the likes, if indeed they're going to have those restrooms open during school hours.
But also, just to reiterate again, this doesn't exist. Unlike the sports complex, which cost about $2.3 million to install, that already had a field. It was leveled. This one, we're going to get rough graded. We've got excavate. We need about 6 inches of aggregate. So there's going to be some work entailed in this, including irrigation, electrical, that type of thing. So estimated cost and a really conservative estimate is about $3.5 million, and that's with 6% escalation up to year 2010, because we don't anticipate getting access to the site for another 18 months. I think what they said is if they start now, they can let us on in 18 months. The board has already given them approval for the buildings, and the buildings will be located here. They're modulars or tilt-up type of school buildings, apparently, and cheaper than building, from scratch. So that's what they are apparently purchasing at this point, and saving a considerable amount of money, apparently.
I'm very pleased that we're moving forward. We've talked about it for 6 years that I know of, so I'm glad we're finally going to put it in place, and I hope that we can, and this is the right neighborhood for it, that's for sure. And I also hope we can identify some other schools, elementary or junior highs, that we can begin to do something similar. What comes to mind is Wilson, for instance.
We do. We have the old report. I think 2-3 years ago we did a report that outlined 8 school sites, and we
Right.
talked about that last week a little bit.
Right.
Dunsmore was one of the school sites, and we had a number of other school sites identified. It's just a matter of dusting it off and bringing it back. It's funding, really.
So, what's our next step? Do we wait for the school board to say okay, or do we ask? I mean, how do we go? What's the process? What process do we follow?
Well, which comes
Send our
first?
mayor to the school board so he could say he wants to cooperate
Which
with
comes
them?
first, the chicken or the egg? I need to find out from Dr. Escalante when he anticipates bringing this forward to the school board, and I think we try and do it at about the same time. I mean, some feedback from you, I assume, in an informal fashion, he'll get some feedback from the school board. I think from our standpoint, again, the issue of timing aside, we see this as one that it serves a very park-impacted portion of our community. The Columbus has been talked about for a long time. It's taken the district, frankly, that time to get to the point that they have a strategy on building a building that'll get them within their budget. And it was the use of the modular construction on the building that got them to the point they could see their way clear to begin the project. Our view is, unless something surfaces along the way that is a much, much better economic deal, our instincts tell us this is about as good as it's going to get, especially given the siting, the ability, given the large site, to provide some parking. And frankly, in our view, Dr. Escalante and his staff taking what we feel is a very reasonable approach to keeping campus open, sharing costs, and the likes.
And it really does create a soccer field south of the 134 in an area that's really needed.
Well,
so.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But I think, in my mind, it would help us a lot if Dr. Escalante puts this question in front of the school board sooner than later, as we go back and start looking at some of the priorities we have, I'd like to know if the school board, at least 3 of the 5, is willing to move in that direction and there has been a vote taken. So this way, as we talk about our priorities, I can either look at this, or if the 3 of the 5 says, no, this is not what we want to do, no matter how much Dr. Escalante wants it, then at that point, this is off table, so my mind will start thinking about other opportunities.
It's understandable.
Mr. Mayor, your general feedback today will, I think, be that first step, that I can communicate to Dr. Escalante kind of the general feedback we've had about the concept. That kind of puts the soccer ball in their court.
We are very reasonable people with the best interests of the community and the kids at mind. Mr. Weaver.
It's a great political statement. I don't know if it was suggested, but may I suggest something that we did, I don't know how many years ago, maybe before any of you were here, a joint meeting with the school board. We can face each other and stare it down.
Actually, that's been in my time.
That's better than having Dr. Escalante go to them, they give him opinion, then he comes back to you, and you come back to us. Let's all sit down together and find out where we're going.
So we do that.
Do my colleagues agree to that?
That's fine, but I do remember we had a session a few years ago where we all were very interested in pursuing these mixed-use type of projects, and absolutely nothing happened. So I personally, we have talked it to death. The school district just has to act on what we have agreed to do a long time ago. We've done one, Pacific Edison, then we've done Cerritos, and now hopefully this will be our third, when in fact we had already identified 8+ schools where it could happen, and it just doesn't seem
Let's get
to
them
happen.
to sit down and get the word out of their mouth.
Mr. Draymond.
Well, I'd like to comment on a more hopeful aspect of it with regard to the school board. I had the fortune on last Wednesday night, to speak to the Northwest Homeowners Association. They had a lot of questions for me there. That was their annual meeting, and the president of the school board was actually in the audience and actually raised the issue and seems to be very desirous of working with the city to partner on some of these projects. I think he's raised the question. I think let's see if we can get a couple more of his colleagues to jump on board as well.
So he put it on his colleagues that they're not the ones cooperating?
Well, I don't think he said it quite that way, but...
Mr. Starbird.
Yeah, my encouragement is not to prejudge. As I've noted before, in school, city, cooperative efforts, you have to sow 100 seeds to try and get, one flower to grow. Pacific Edison, Cerritos, a template that has the campus being open without us getting all immersed in issues of who's going to be liable in case something happens is a big step forward just in terms of philosophy, aside from the field being developed.
Mr. Yusefian.
I'll tell you, for myself, I think this is a great opportunity. Whether the campus is open or closed, it's irrelevant to me. Whether it's open or closed, still people are going to go there and play. And so I am not going to kill a project because their desire is to close the campus. If they want to keep it open, great. If you want to close the campus, great. The number one issue to me is, do they want to do this? And so I am willing to go there so long as they're willing to go there. And so the ball is actually, for the soccer, the ball is on their court. So let them kick it in the right direction, and I'm there to catch the ball.
That would be a penalty unless you were the goalie.
Well, that's it.
Mr. Weaver.
You're good, Mr. Mayor. No, I'm just suggesting if we meet together and get a commitment to move down the path, we're not going to work out the details. That's up to the two staffs. But once both staffs hear from us jointly to move that direction, then we can sit back and let the steps unfold. But we got to get that commitment. We're there. We got to hear from the school board that they're there.
Then let
If
the
they want to
staff
have
go.
a joint meeting here and just discuss this project
That's
on
what I'm
forward,
talking
but I
about.
do agree with Mr. Quintero. We did this in the past. Maybe
Worked.
the problem with the last one was when we had so many different projects, it kind of got convoluted.
No, one.
But I think on this one project, we just have together, just one project, do a joint meeting and get it over with. We'll know for sure we got it or we don't.
It's unfair to put Mr. Starbird and Dr. Escalante on there talking to each other when they can't speak for either group. We've got to sit together as groups.
I
and-
like putting
and
him
do
in
it.
unfair positions. That's why he gets paid for it.
Okay. It's 11:30. I'd like to conclude this fairly quickly, maybe get a
Got a
report
card.
from Mr.
You have a card,
Allers,
too.
and then have the speaker.
So Mr. Weaver and I are the only ones who want to have joint meetings? You guys don't want it? So this way he
No.
can make it?
By no means. I think a meeting, a joint meeting, whether it's with the one of us, the mayor, and a few of us, or all of us.
Let's just have a joint
Face-to-face.
meeting and
Get it out here.
televise it and,
Everybody
let's
hear
see.
it.
Yeah.
Joint study session.
We want to
They
televise.
keep telling us that we're not we're not out there trying to help and we're not cooperative. So this will be a good way of showing to the public that we are cooperative and we want to hold hands in hands and sing Kumbaya or whatever we need to do. I mean, let's just do it.
Is this something we'd have to agendize, Mr.? I mean, to agendize the discussion of whether to call a meeting? No.
I also,
Mr. Quintero.
having a joint meeting to me also means that we have some specific agenda items, that specific item and others, not another general planning session.
Just this.
Let's make it a specific issue, and we'll get up or down votes. And
Then it's done.
Can we
We
bring
can go or
Pacific
we don't.
Edison back into the mix for renegotiation?
No.
or is that-
That's this.
Don't go there.
Don't ruin it.
Okay. I'm just asking.
We could project.
I think that would be appropriate.
I mean, frankly. Standards should be a very positive move.
No.
The memory serves following the lab and survey and evaluate.
Yeah.
We ended up and
Franklin.
that frankly
Yep.
greening of the Let's put our resources someplace else. But there was a lot of follow-up. Again, at the time, Columbus was an identified site. It has taken a number of years for the district to figure out a way that they can proceed with their construction, which then clears the way for us to proceed. So these things, they take a long time, but that's usually for a whole lot of reasons.
Right, and I think at Franklin School, the city council allocated $1 million towards
Yeah.
that. It was just the neighborhood didn't want it, really.
It was
And,
fear of what it would become.
Tennis courts, did we mention tennis courts as well?
We can give you a review of the tennis court
But,
discussion.
I mean, well, perhaps if that's appropriate at the time
Agendize
of
that at the meeting?
Oh, yeah, we can do that then, too. Frankly, we'd like to have a sense of support from the school board, again, on the understanding we reached with the staff on the tennis courts as well. Unless we can get a joint meeting together very quickly, we'd like to either begin to move on the high school or frankly shift our gears and focus on the other option for tennis courts.
Call the meeting.
They meet every other week.
Mr.
So
Let Mr. Quintero
on
have
the
floor.
Franklin School issue or other parks, when neighbors complain, I've said it before, all over Europe, you have beautiful green parks that have a fence around it, that have wrought iron, black fences around them. They look great, they look stately. It's beyond me how on the Franklin School we just opted out not to have it when all you have to do is encircle the park, in this case the elementary school in the park portion. You have motion detectors now. They don't cost very much money. If anyone jumps into that park, you've basically got them trapped. When the police department shows up, there they are. So, I mean, I don't see that as being an issue for any neighborhood when we want to do this type of mixed-use
We did hold meetings, and I have to tell you, about 50 people came out in opposition.
Well,
it wasn't just one or two, but
they-
I mean, it was strong opposition towards it.
Let's
We did
hear about
try,
this one.
and I think we brought that back to council. And
Okay, Mr. Starbird, what can we conclude?
I think we have your feedback relative to this project, and we'll work to get a joint meeting together with the school board. We need to spend the next 30 minutes doing a quick summary of general fund. Again, you have that budget coming to you both in public hearing next week and then in final adoption mode the following month. And if we're going to have any time to talk about any issues you have relative to general fund operations, we need to get through that as well. So let me suggest we turn to the general fund overview. Ron?
Sure. Thank you, George.
Are we going to 12 today?
With all due haste, I think we have to go to 12.
Plan was going to 12.
And I do have a speaker still. Have to reserve time for.
I'm going to skip ahead since we have 30 minutes left in our study session. I'm going to skip forward to slide 6 so that we can discuss general fund and some changes from the prior year. Once again, this is the second year of our 2-year plan, and we have a number of changes that have developed. If you can think about forecasting 12 months, this was actually forecasting about 18 to 30 months out when we did this starting January, February, March of '06. So we have new information, we have new estimates, and here is what is already included in your preliminary budget book, which all of the council received prior to June 1, about a week and a half ago. We have an increase in PERS of $1.5 million, and what this is they forecast out the rates a year ahead of time, and they forecasted them going down, and they went up instead. So it was not only making up the difference, it was also going beyond that. So that's about $1.5 million.
Mr. Yusefian?
At one point, I remember a day that PERS was 0.
Oh, yes, you do.
Okay. At the time that we started going into these large numbers, there was some story told about the fact that one day we may get to those, not maybe 0, but some low numbers. Is that going to ever happen?
Short answer, no.
Okay, got it.
Okay,
so it will
let's go,
continue
Mr.
to be in
Roberts.
that numbers. Okay.
Let's push through this.
Sure. This is basically going to be our number. We're going to be in the $15 million range. And again, this is just the general fund, the city portion of PERS. This doesn't include the other funds nor the employee portion. We have increased the budget for fuel, $887,000. Due to gas prices, we're all experiencing that personally, and the city does corporately. Again, this is just the general fund portion. This is not GWP or refuse or sewer and so forth, only general fund. Utilities increased $739,000. If you'll recall, the City Council increased electric rates July 1, 2006, and also for July 1, 2007, and we're in that middle corporate market. That's the city of Glendale, actually. So we experience a higher rate than the average.
Mr.
Mayor, I actually was watching, and I saw the school district was complaining that their price was going to go up, so I guess ours is going to go up too. But one thing that we have helped the school district tremendously by investing a large sum of money, over $1 million, to retrofit some of their equipment. My question is, are we taking advantage of the same program for our own places?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Because as I drive around some other cities, I see a lot more solar panels on parking lots, garages, buildings, even older buildings, and with the exception of what's going to happen, I think at the college, I don't see us going to any of these places and putting some of these things on. I mean, we need to start taking more advantage of that program for ourselves.
Okay. Thank you.
Depreciation has also increased, and again, this is the general fund. I call it depreciation. It's actually setting aside money to replace our mobile equipment, so from police cars to fire apparatus to parks vehicles and so forth.
On that, same thing, issue of the fuel. I know you can't buy vehicles that are, very efficient, like for fire trucks or things like that nature. But on Rangers, for example, now you have SUVs that are hybrids or electric or whatever. Is there opportunities to do something of that sort?
Mr. McFall.
We actually have staff working on developing some very specific recommendations that go right to that type of a target, to look at what is the minimum size vehicle that employees can use to be able to do their job appropriately, alternative fuels, that recovers the range of all of these topics that deal with the environment, conservation, doing the right thing, fuel costs, and so on. And that is a report with recommendations that will be coming to council shortly.
Okay. Mr. Allers. Next item, county property tax administration fee. If you recall, I came to the council at a night meeting about 3 months ago to increase this amount for this year. Previously, it was zero. A law got passed in either 2003 or 2004 that gave the counties the authority to pass this administrative cost on to cities and other agencies effective in 2006-07. So this was a change that we did not know about 18 months ago, and now we do.
What does that mean?
We pay this to the county for our property taxes.
Correct.
So we pay property taxes to the county, and the county collects them. No, the average citizen.
Right.
Okay. County collects them, and then they send our portion to us.
Correct.
And for that
service,
they're charging us $290,000.
Right.
Actually, they're charging us a lot more. This is an increase to us to just collecting the ERAF portion for our VLF.
So what is
the total? Oh my gosh.
Never mind.
It's quite a few $100,000 for just the general fund, and the redevelopment agency also pays a few $100,000.
They've been doing that in the past.
Right, but this was a brand new fee.
In addition to that.
That is correct.
I think it's about 2% is generally what they can collect. Because this would be about 1%, a little less.
Right, 14 million. No, this is about your 2%.
About 2%?
This is about because we get about 14 million in ERAF in lieu of VLF.
Yeah, that's my sense, is they get about 2% of what they collect for you.
Right. Last item is increase in insurance and surety bonds. Again, this is just general fund portion, about $275,000.
And the purpose is what? Why?
This is increases in our insurance cost. So we do have buy excess liability insurance, and we parse that dollars out to the whole city. So this is the general fund portion.
And we shop around to make sure.
Yes, we do.
So we don't stay with the same company for 20 years?
No, we do not.
This is generally what's happening as a result of lawsuits and catastrophic losses in the insurance industry.
Right. Okay. Next slide. We start off 2007-08 with the beginning.
Wait a minute. Catastrophic losses and record profits. Because you have both in the insurance industry. Let's make sure we get that in the record.
We're on the receiving end of the premiums, not the profits.
We never get the profits.
That's right. Could become a stockholder. We start off for 2007-08 with a surplus of approximately $1.5 million, and I'll go through these in detail in the next few slides. We are going to increase one revenue, our building permit revenue, and that'll correspond with an expenditure increase, and I'll touch on that. So the $250,000 is building permit revenue. Less expenses. We have expenses that we have recommended in these slides to council for council to approve of $1,764,000. With this, we have in those expenses we have some one-time money in there. For example, in internal audit, for them to do a peer review, which is a one-time cost of $20,000, And then also in the doctor's house to paint it, we'll paint it every 8 years or 10 years or whatever the cycle is. So we're proposing to use basically 2006-07 reserves for these one-time expenditures. So that's the $120,000 that you see there. And then we have what is called a budget under expenditure of $400,000 for an increase. Mr. Starbird alluded to this prior. We do estimate salary savings every year. In this current budget for 2007-08, we have estimated that salary savings for the general fund to be $1.6 million. We could safely increase that by $400,000 to go to an even $2 million in salary savings estimated for 2007-08. So that's the increase of the $400,000, and we end up with our revised surplus of $545,000.
At 1.7, if I add all these red numbers, is that what it comes up to?
No, those red numbers that you're looking at, Councilmember Yosefian, is just the variances in the revenues.
So where do I find this $1.7 million?
We shall start on it in 2 slides.
Oh, okay, so it's not in prior, it's after.
Right.
Okay.
On slide number 8, I already mentioned this, increased building permit revenue by a $250,000. It's currently at $4.25 million estimate, so this will bring it up to $4.5 million. This year, building permit revenue could top out at $6 million. It'll be real close to $6 million.
Okay. And are we setting up a special account to put the money for not plan check, but for building permit in that account, especially for those high rises, so we don't get into trouble like LA got into trouble? Because when they don't build the building and they pay the permit fee, if the guy doesn't build the building, he can come back and ask for a refund of that. And that's how LA ended up having to pay millions of dollars, because they paid the fees and then they didn't build the building, and the guy came back and says, I want my building permit fee back. And that was millions of dollars that LA had already spent. So are we doing that on large buildings at least?
No, we are not. But again, we're going to receive anywhere from $5.5 to $6 million in building permit revenue. That excess is going into general fund reserves, and actually $2 million of it on a prior slide I had put on, we would set aside into a separate fund so we can handle kind of the ups and downs in
Okay, so if they
the
come
economy
back,
and
then we
he would have the money there
general fund.
available.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Let me point out here, too, and this, again, is part of our revenue estimating process. It's very likely that next year will still be very high in our building permits, could be upwards of $6 million. We're not making that assumption. Instead, we're pulling back to what is a more normal year and estimating our revenues more like $4.5 million. So very likely we will still hit 6 or above next year. We haven't included that in our estimates because we don't want to base our operations on what is a 1 or 2 or 3 year jump in our revenues that'll then fall back down. So again, we're estimating our revenues for building based on a more normal year, and that's what we'd be assuming to support our general operations.
That's a good idea.
It's a very conservative approach, and one that we don't want to be caught short in a year or two if these numbers drop. We've then hired staff and built up an operation that we can't support.
We're running out of time. Go ahead, Ron. See if you can.
I will try and go faster. I think we just have 3 more slides to run through. These 3 slides make up the $1.7 million of recommendations to the City Council to fund for 2007-08. You'll notice that there is a request column on second to the right-hand column. This was the original request from the department, or an original estimate of what the cost would be. You'll notice that usually they are rounded to the thousands because it is an estimate. And then there's a recommendation that we have proposed to the City Council to adopt. On the far left, you'll see the department, if it is departmentalized as far as the increase in the budget or so forth. So I'll skip down because we were short on time. We have Verdugo Fire Communication increased annual fee. This is the City of Glendale's portion to operate Verdugo. Again, Burbank, Glendale, Pasadena own the Verdugo system for the 911 calls for fire and medical emergencies. So this is our increased fee of $15,000. Fire also put in for a firefighter recruit academy, and that is funded at $200,000, and that is to operate the Recruit Academy. In prior years, we have funded this, one, from salary savings, and two, it was an academy happened every 3 years or every 4 years. It was real intermittent. What we are discovering is that we're probably going to be operating an academy every year. So it is becoming a part of our normal operating cost here in the fire department. And so to run the Recruit Academy, we're going to fund it at $200,000. We are recommending that we increase employee recruitment advertising by $15,000. Increased training for our city attorney's office by $15,000. We have included already these insurance costs and telephone and utility costs. That was on the prior slide, that what we had already included, but the certain departments didn't know that, so they asked for these, but it's already included in their budget. I'll skip on down towards the bottom. Video streaming, this is to video stream additional board meetings that we are currently not doing. I'm sorry?
I'd like to clarify, this is not for additional video streaming at this point. This is to move the funds from actually our cable access fund to the general fund. Okay. And it's to pay for the annual costs that we pay currently to Granicus for the video streaming that we currently do for city council meetings.
This is not addressing the question of should we be video streaming the other boards and commissions.
Correct.
And archiving that.
That report is
That's a later
coming to the
report that's coming
city
to you.
council in a
And
couple of weeks.
Why did we move this from PEG into this?
Initially, the way the report came to City Council last year, PEG was going to pick up the cost for 1 year because they were able to do so. But with a lot of things that are going on with the PEG fund, we had decided at the time that we would transfer that to IS, to the general fund, and that portion of it never occurred, Mr. Yusefian. And so to basically clean the records, we need to be able to do it now and have it be charged to the general fund.
And that is because the PEG doesn't have the money?
Not currently, no.
Okay.
I mean, we will know.
It's going to be
Correct.
franchise after January 1.
Okay.
Next, last item on this first slide is $15,000 increase for the special events annual expenditures. On down
And
to
that $15,000 special events is for Unity Fest.
Correct.
The Week of Remembrance, Cesar
All those
Chavez,
events.
and all of that
Correct.
stuff. Okay.
Fireworks.
And the fireworks.
Fireworks now for $5,000.
And 15,000 is going to be enough?
Well, we already budgeted.
Correct. This is the addition to the budget.
How much?
What do you budget right now?
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, currently we have $35,000 in the Special
So you're
Events
making
Fund.
it into 50?
Correct.
Okay.
Let's move down to Public Works, Building and Safety, increased plan check services, increase for contracts of $250,000. This corresponds with the $250,000 increase in the building permit fees. So this gives the Public Works Department an increase in appropriation, should they need it, to for their plan check services. Moving on down to internal audit, outside peer review. This is a one-time cost of $20,000, and this is how we're funding with the prior year surplus. Another one-time cost is repair and paint for the doctor's house. You'll recall that is at Brand Park, and that is an $80,000. Again, we are funding that from prior year surplus, since it is a one-time event. On to the third page.
Wait. How come we're not doing document scanning and indexing for the planning? What's that? These are the current, these are the new ones, or these are the old ones? We're trying to catch up with the old ones, or what is that?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, we believe that this is a very important project to do, along with a number of other document scanning projects. Information Services has been working with the departments to come up with, I think, what's going to be an overall comprehensive recommendation on how we should be managing our document scanning and indexing, and it would probably be more appropriate for us to address this issue in light of other priorities. There is also, we're trying to sort out some issues relative to additional fees that are being charged in the building department for scanning purposes. How much revenue will be available from some recommendations that council has previously accepted and adopted, and some additional recommendations on a surcharge for scanning that information services and planning will be making. So this is more putting it on the table right now until we can come up, until we're able to present a more comprehensive plan.
Okay. We're also not dealing with the prices of increasing concrete and asphalt. I don't want to get into the same situation we ended up with the gas. We give a fixed amount, and then people spend more money on gas because gas prices go up, and then we come back in the end of the year and we say, okay, give me this big whopping change. So why aren't we just doing that now so we don't have this problem later? We know price of gas, we know price of asphalt and concrete's gone up. It's not that much. I mean, we're talking about $100,000.
This issue is really
General fund section. This is sidewalks repairs and that type of stuff.
I just might add, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Yusefian, and unlike gas, where we continue to have to drive and pay that price, what this would mean is we would do less work. That's simply what that means. We would take the budget as far as we could. We would do less work.
And then people will come in here and show us the slides, the walk of shame. I don't know about the rest of you guys. I'm for give him the $60,000, $40,000 so at least he can do that. We will end up paying more just in trip and falls. That
$40,000 in concrete isn't going to get you much anyway.
No, but 40. How many linear feet you will?
Mr. Mayor, actually, it does. As I always say, those two items are in our own crews. In our own crews, it's labor that's most expensive. It doesn't take
materials for them.
Small amount of material goes a long way with our crews.
So for me, it's put the 60 and 40 back. I mean, I see the sidewalk conditions in the city. It's not exactly, this is just going to buy him enough concrete to just fix some of those things. It's a patchwork. It's not even a replacement. So, I mean, what good is having a crew has no material?
Okay, Mr. Quintero.
I don't see the Catholic Charities job center here in this budget. Coming from somewhere else? Yeah, day labor.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, it's actually in the budget. It's a 2-year budget. It was budgeted last year for 2 years.
Oh, okay.
So
There's no
it's
increase.
budgeted.
Not changing.
No, it's budgeted in the neighborhood services budget.
Okay, we're out of time except for our speaker. It's 11:55. Mr. Starbird?
Is there a direction on the 60 and the 40?
We have the label, no material. What good is it? So they stand around?
I can support it, I guess. There's others,
Well, what are we talking about?
Let me just say that from a staff perspective, from a management perspective, we totally support that. In fact, we support the majority of these requests that are up there. Very honestly, it was a matter of looking at the available funds that were left, prioritizing what seemed to be the greatest, most urgent need, and then trying to leave a small margin. This only leaves about $500,000 contingency with these recommendations in our general fund. So it isn't really much more complicated than that. We absolutely believe Public Works does need that additional asphalt and concrete funding. It was a matter of prioritizing.
Mr. Mayor, I might ask, Steve, what's your total budget? I mean, how much budget do you have for materials? So what percentage of that is this?
This is probably about, exactly, concrete budget's probably about $100,000.
Oh, so this is a pretty significant increase.
Yeah, and asphalt's probably about, not too far, 150 maybe.
because these have been reduced, in terms of nominal dollars, these have been reduced from the past. So Mr. Zern is actually trying to rebuild these amounts to previous levels.
We've traditionally, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, gone back to CIPs that have extra money and use that.
I was going to say,
We scrimp and scrape every dime we can get.
Steve, is there any reason if indeed you got to the point we had increases to the point that your crews didn't have materials, you couldn't draw on some of your capital money to supplement that?
That's what we've been doing.
Yeah.
But this has been cut, and as Mr. McFall indicated,
Okay, we're going to do it.
Yeah, let's just do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to do it. Now, can we break here?
Sure. Well, we can wrap up the balance of this next week. We'd like to again go from 9 till noon next week to try and wrap
I
up
think-
general fund and put you in a position where hopefully you can have a budget you can approve for the following public hearing.
I think we're resigned to that. And
We start page 12?
We'll start on page 11.
Well, there's not much on 11.
Well, I mean, we haven't hit 11 yet, so we start on 11, hopefully clean that up, and then move on.
okay, I have Mr. Allen, but I'm not sure we ever got to the report for which you wanted to
Well,
respond
why don't we
to.
do that report, and then Mr. Allen can comment. Ron, you prepared to give the response on that? On the question that Mr. Allen raised last week?
Right. Mr. Allen raised a question on the fire grant fund and how is it that we have one position allocated and the salaries is upward of $485,000. And what that is again, we are in the second year of a 2-year budget. And in the prior years, we had actual funding for the one fire battalion chief, a systems specialist, an admin associate, and half of a fire captain that was funded out of this fire grant fund. So right now, those grants for 2007-8, we're only going to fund one position, but we had not pulled back the salary and the benefits amount for all of those positions that I just previously mentioned. So,
But even at that, it wasn't one position, it was multiple positions.
it was multiple positions. So we have pulled those dollars back, so now we are just funding in the budget for those salary and benefits, which will amount to approximately $85,000, one administrative associate position.
All right, so it was an error, an oversight, and we thank...
And we have now corrected
We
it.
thank Mr. Allen. Does he get a finder's fee for that?
But
Okay.
most importantly, it wasn't one position. Even if the program had continued, it was multiple
It was three
positions. There isn't a
benefits
position in the
tied
city
to
that makes $485,000 a year.
Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council, staff, and the public. I'm Barry Allen. I assumed it was some sort of an error. However, if you look back over the last 3 or 4 years, you'll see that that error persisted. And I would imagine that this has had some sort of an effect by changing the numbers in the budget and moving that money, those numbers out of the fire department. But I think you need to look back over the last 3 or 4 years. Also, it is my understanding that there is a particular process in reviewing the budget by each department. And obviously, someone in the fire department missed a very, very glaring error, and or just kind of accepted it. If it went through and you gentlemen just voted on it, it would be fine. It would be money transferred to other areas. Now, the other thing that we looked at is not only the payroll of the $485,000. I'm quite sure that you have looked at the numbers relative to the $110,000 for furniture and equipment. And that amount, by the way, has gone back over the last 3 or 4 years. Or $155,000 for general supplies. Not bad for one department that is writing grants and funneling money back and forth to different things. And I think there is some total mismanagement, and I think it behooves this council, when you go back and read the George Skelton's column in yesterday's LA Times, regarding your responsibility to the people who have elected you. 207,000 people, or the 24,000 people who turned up at the polls to vote, they're actually asking you to represent them and review these numbers. Now, I agree, there's 1,000 pages, but there's 5 of you, that's 200 apiece. Now, I know you've also found the other 3 errors in the budget, and I know that you'll certainly correct them before before you vote on them in the public has their hearing in the next few weeks. Now, I think you really need to take a serious look at your fiduciary relationship to the public. You have a responsibility. You have asked the public to vote for you, and the public has. And now you've got to take a serious look at this, and you've got to say, how comes they spend so much money for furniture every year out of the fire grants fund? How comes they spend so much money each year, the last 4 or 5 years, for supplies? You could supply the entire city management, city clerk, and city attorney's office. Now, as well, I heard the words this morning spoken about we have to abide by the charter. As I recall, the charter indicates that money left over from general fund accounts that are given out each year, such as the city attorney's office, where it was a transfer a few weeks ago, that money has to be swept out and put back into the general fund. Now, that would certainly put some more money into the general fund, and it would allow you to take a serious look at the monies that are left back in various accounts buried here and there, unless those monies are already encumbered for a particular project, and then it can stay in that account for that department. And I don't think this council is holding management accountable to come back and give you the proper numbers. And, it's great to have the PowerPoint presentations, but it lacks a lot of the detail. And certainly you can get caught up in maybe 12 hours of budget study sessions, which is certainly not enough to cover 1,000 pages of budget and then drill down. And I think you've got to take a serious look at this relationship that you have with the public and your role to supervise management and direct management and give management your vision. And be familiar with your organizing document, which is the city charter, and make sure that charter is used at all these issues. For instance, the sweeping of accounts. How much more money would there be? How many little buckets are there in all of the city accounts that you don't know about? One of your former councilmen mentioned that to me a while back, and he says, geez, there's always a bucket with money in it. Always a bucket with money in it. And I think it's time to take those buckets and put them back into the general fund. And maybe we'll have to do some of the more drastic things that we're doing to provide certain city services. I'm Barry Allen, and I thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Sefian.
I'd like to have the staff give us a list of those buckets if they exist.
Do a bucket list.
And so give me a list of those buckets.
And kick the bucket too?
Huh? Yeah. And with that, I'd like to move to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned for the study session. We have closed at 1 o'clock.